Chapter 128. Yan's caravan traveled for a few more days. Although the sex elders hadn't arrived yet, elite disciples from the Lotus Escort Agency and Misty School's strongholds in the surrounding towns had arrived. Yan's safety could be considered guaranteed. After that, Aunt Qin issued an order for the nearby sex disciples to follow the river and search for Zhang Xiaohua's body. There would be a great reward if they found it. Thus, other than the disciples who had a mission, everyone else followed the river to search. However, until the seventh day, when Li Jian, Li Laoer, Lu Qingyang, and Lu Laowu rushed over from Pingyang City and received Yan's carriage, there was still no news from Zhang Xiaohua. Was Zhang Xiaohua dead? Or alive? On that day, that night, and that moment, Zhang Xiaohua was struck in the chest by the black-clothed elder and immediately fainted. Her body was sent flying and fell diagonally towards the river. Zhang Xiaohua was originally running towards the river with Yan on her back. The place where they exchanged blows wasn't far from the river. Zhang Xiaohua's body was small and the black-clothed elder's palm strength was vigorous. Although this palm strike couldn't directly send Zhang Xiaohua into the river, only half of her chest was left on the river bank. At that time the river was so turbulent. In less than a moment, the river water rushed towards Zhang Xiaohua's legs and dragged her into the river. By the time He Tianshu searched for her, Zhang Xiaohua had already been washed far away. Speaking of which, Zhang Xiaohua was lucky. If the black-clothed elder's palm strength had increased by just a bit, Zhang Xiaohua would have directly fallen into the river with a plop. Then she would have sunk and been washed away. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua's legs entered the water first. Her upper body was dragged into the water, but her head was above water. Otherwise, even if she wasn't beaten to death by the black-clothed elder, the river water would have drowned her. The unconscious Zhang Xiaohua's body was extremely relaxed. Thus, it was very easy for her to float on the river. At this time it was already midnight. The unconscious Zhang Xiaohua was once again in a flickering dream. However, it was unknown if he could see it. In the darkness, Zhang Xiaohua floated in the water and flowed down 3,000 feet with the current. However, this Zhang Xiaohua's drifting was different from others. Generally, when someone fell into the water, they would first float for a period of time. They would either sink into the water or reach the shore and be stranded there. This was what Aunt Qin and the others had imagined. Thus, they had the disciples search along the river. However, this Zhang Xiaohua was different. It was unknown whether it was because she was still small, or because her body was light, or because she was having a flickering dream. Her small body seemed to be weightless as she floated in the river. The small sword she held tightly in her left hand also seemed to have lost its usual weight. Zhang Xiaohua's body was like a floating wooden board. She was as fast as the current. Thus, when He Tianshu sent people to search for her the second time, Zhang Xiaohua had already been washed to an unimaginable distance. Later, the people He Tianshu sent only found a distance that they thought was far based on their experience. However, this far was something that Zhang Xiaohua had already surpassed. At daybreak, the rain still hadn't stopped. The river became even more turbulent. Zhang Xiaohua floated on the river like this for an unknown distance. When it was almost evening, Zhang Xiaohua finally floated to a roundabout bend in the river. It was unknown how far this place was from the place where Zhang Xiaohua had fallen into the water. Beside the river bend was a simple straw hut surrounded by a few fences. In the open space of the straw hut, there was a wooden frame that extended into the river. At this moment there was a girl about 10 years old sitting there, holding a fishing rod in one hand and propping up her cheek with the other. Her eyes were listless as she stared ahead. The girl was wearing a light yellow dress and was very neat. Her long black hair was tied up from the top of her head with a handkerchief and casually scattered behind her head. The girl's face was like a duck's egg. Her eyes were big and there were small eye bags. Her skin was fair and there was a dark red beauty mark at the corner of her mouth. This girl wasn't extremely beautiful, but her clear black and white eyes and slightly raised eyebrows showed her imposing temperament without a doubt. At the girl's age, it wasn't the season of spring yet, so why was she frowning? At this moment, the fishing rod in the girl's hand seemed to have caught a big fish and slipped out. The girl didn't seem to have noticed. Suddenly, a loving voice came from the straw hut. "Silly child, if you're distracted again, not only will you not catch the fish, your fishing rod will also be stolen by the fish." Only then did the girl wake up from her dream. She quickly grabbed the fishing rod that was about to slip out of her hand. When she raised her eyes to look into the river, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Abbess, it's a dead person." Eh. The person in the house exclaimed and walked out. It was a kind-looking old woman in her 50s. She wore extremely clean moon-white clothes, and there was a long sword hanging from her waist. The old woman quickly walked to the front of the frame. When she looked carefully, at the end of the fishing rod on the hook, wasn't it the unconscious Zhang Xiaohua? The girl looked at Zhang Xiaohua's corpse and sadly said, "Poor child, he probably fell into the water like me. His family must be very sad if they can't find him." As she spoke, she seemed to have touched something in her heart. The worry on her face became more obvious. The abbess looked at the corpse in the water and said, "Then let's fish him out. Although we don't know where he fell into the water, it rained heavily last night and the river has risen a lot. It won't be easy to find where he came from. Why don't we bury him here so that he won't be soaked in the water and become food for the fishes and turtles?" The girl's miserable expression didn't lessen. She only nodded and used her strength to pull the fishing rod back. When Zhang Xiaohua was pulled to the shore, the abbess walked closer and didn't avoid anything. She stretched out her hand to pull Zhang Xiaohua's arm. Fortunately, the frame on the water wasn't very high and the water had risen a lot today. The abbess leaned forward slightly and grabbed onto Zhang Xiaohua's arm. The abbess grabbed onto Zhang Xiaohua's arm and was about to use her internal energy to pull him to the shore. Suddenly, she looked happy and shouted, "He's still alive." When the girl heard this, she was also very happy. She quickly came over to help. However, she was small and weak. What could she do to help? Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua's body wasn't heavy. The abbess only used one hand to pull him out of the river. She was just more careful than before. When the abbess saw that the girl wanted to help, she smiled and said, "Go boil some water and make some ginger soup. This child has been in the water for who knows how long. He must be cold. Drink some ginger soup to dispel the cold." When the little girl heard this, she skipped and ran away. The worry between her eyebrows seemed to have lessened a little. When the abbess carried Zhang Xiaohua to the straw hut, she changed his wet clothes and wrapped him in a thick quilt. Then she carefully checked his pulse and used her internal energy to check his body. Her expression became even more serious. At this time, she saw that Zhang Xiaohua's left hand was tightly holding onto the small sword. She tried to pull it out with her hand, but it didn't budge. She then put Zhang Xiaohua's left hand and the small sword in his hand into the quilt. When the girl walked into the straw hut with the bowl, the abbess was still frowning. She seemed to be thinking about something. The girl carefully asked Abbess what happened to him. Can he still be saved? When the abbess saw that the girl was worried, she smiled and said, "He didn't fall into the water for no reason. He suffered a very serious internal injury and was thrown into the river by someone." When the girl heard this, she became even sadder and said, "He's about the same age as me. Who could he have offended? It must be a bad person who caused him to be like this. Abbess, aren't you a martial arts expert? You must save him." Hearing the girl's words, the abbess couldn't help but feel ashamed. She had been in the martial arts world for too long. Her considerations were too complicated. Just now, she was actually thinking whether this youth was a bad person. She couldn't see it clearly as a little girl. How could a teenager be a bad person? Since this was the case, how could she not save him? Thus, the abbess ordered the girl to go out and put a wooden basin in front of the Kong. Then she helped Zhang Xiaohua up and put him in a meditative position. Then she sat behind Zhang Xiaohua and put her palms on his back. She then used her sex's unique healing method to help Zhang Xiaohua heal the injury from the light golden palm. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua's face gradually became rosy, and there was a faint steam rising from his head. The abbess' right palm pulled out and immediately Zhang Xiaohua's back. Then she used more strength and with a paw sound she slapped his shoulder. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth opened and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood into the wooden basin. Most of the blood was black and had already solidified. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua spit out the blood clots, the abbess let out a long breath. She withdrew her palms and carefully laid Zhang Xiaohua flat on the Kong. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's face was slightly rosy, and his breathing was also slightly stable. His forehead was covered in sweat and there were signs that he was alive. The girl quickly took the wooden basin out and poured the dirty blood into the river. When she returned to the house, she carefully asked, "Abbess, is he cured just like that?" The abbess smiled and said, "How can it be that simple? I only forced out the clogged blood. He has never practiced internal energy, and his meridians are still blocked. Using internal energy to treat him won't be very effective. Only medicinal stones are the best way to treat him. That's the skill of a doctor, and I can't do it. But where can we find a doctor in the wilderness? The nearest town is a day's journey away, and he'll have to use his qigong to get there. How can he withstand the bumpy journey with his injuries? I'm afraid he'll lose his life before he reaches town." The girl frowned and said, "Then what should we do?" The abbess continued, "I don't know which bastard injured this child, but the attack was very vicious. All the organs in his body have been displaced. If the injury to his heart was even a little heavier, he would have died long ago. However, he was probably thrown into the river. During this period of floating in the water, it was like sleeping on a Kong bed. The organs in his body were not damaged and are already recovering slightly. I still have a few good healing pills here. I'll give it to him in a while and see the effects. Now the only thing we can do is to rest quietly and see how his luck is." The girl seemed to understand and nodded slightly. She looked at the ginger soup that had already turned cold and said, "Should I still feed it to him?" The abbess smiled and said, "That won't do. Just now he thought he slipped and fell into the water. The ginger soup can dispel the cold, but now he has internal injuries. This ginger soup is something that stimulates the body. If we let him drink it, won't he die? You'd better change it to some plain water and feed him some pills later." The girl obeyed and went to get some plain water. The abbess took out a white porcelain bottle and carefully opened it. She poured out a thumb-sized black pill from the bottle, and then pried open Zhang Xiaohua's teeth. She stuffed the pill into his mouth and washed it down with plain water. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua still had the consciousness to swallow, the abbess became more confident. Zhang Xiaohua's arrival did not affect the abbess and the girls' lives too much. The abbess still went out in the morning and came back in the evening. She would only check on Zhang Xiaohua's condition at night and feed him a pill. The girl would stay in the straw hut and either stare blankly or wander around aimlessly. Most of the time, she would sit by the river with a fishing rod and fish with a lot on her mind. Only the river was turbulent every day. She did not know where it rained. However, nothing else appeared in the river, and she did not catch any fish. A few days passed like this and the weather became colder. It was almost winter and the girl could not stand the cold. She already wanted to start a stove in the straw hut. The abbess's originally calm mood started to become irritated. Her brows would frown from time to time. She seemed to have encountered a huge problem. The girl seemed to have noticed the abbess's abnormal mood. She really wanted to ask but did not know how to start. That night, after the abbess fed the last pill to Zhang Xiaohua, the girl asked, "Abbess, your pills are gone. How are you going to feed him tomorrow?" The abbess took Zhang Xiaohua's pulse and sent a wave of internal energy into his body to check. She said, "There are only so many pills. If there is an effect, then it is enough. If there is no effect, then it is useless no matter how many pills there are." The girl was a little worried and said, "Then how is he now? Is there any effect? Don't let our Baba fish him up and bury him. That would not be worth it." The abbess smiled and said, "Saving people is the process. There is no guarantee that there will be an outcome. With a merciful heart, it is enough. However, you don't have to worry. This child recovered very quickly. It is beyond my expectations. His life should not be in danger. I just don't know why he has not woken up. If this goes on, it will not work. I still have to return to the sect before the end of the year. You also have to go with me. I cannot leave you in the deep mountains. But, if he still does not wake up, do we have to take him with us?" The girl smiled and said, "Then let's take him with us. If you take me in, then I will take in another." The abbess patted her little head and said, "You make it sound so easy. My sect has always taken in women and not men. Even if there are male disciples, they are mostly outer sect disciples. Moreover, I have never thought of taking in a male disciple." The girl spread out her hands and said, "Then we can only take him with us. We will send him to the nearest town and let him fend for himself." The abbess said, "Don't try to provoke me. Let's not talk about sending him to the town first. If he fends for himself with his situation, Once he reaches the town, he will self-destruct. The girl blinked and said, "Then maybe he will be fine before you finish your task?" The abbess smiled and said, "There is no maybe. When I looked for that place, it was already at this point." She suddenly realized something and smiled bitterly, saying, "You little girl, if you want to ask, just say it. Why are you beating around the bush? However, this matter involves a lot of things. I cannot let you know for now. Even if others ask, you can't say anything more, understand?" The girl said disapprovingly, "I understand, abbess. I will keep your secret." The abbess knew that she did not take it to heart, but did not point it out. She continued, "It seems that my task will not be completed this time. However, I have long been mentally prepared. I will continue to do it in the future. Let's wait a few more days. Looking at the time, we can still make it back to the mountain." The girl pouted and said, "I will listen to you, abbess. I have nowhere to go anyway." The abbess patted her head and said lovingly, "It's okay. You will have a place to go in the future." 2 days later, in the wee hours of this day, when the morning sun shone brightly, Zhang Xiaohua, who had been unconscious on the bed of the straw hut, suddenly opened his eyes. In his black eyes, a ball of light flashed and disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua, who had just woken up, looked at the unfamiliar cottage in front of him and felt very strange. However, after thinking for a while, he roughly knew how he felt. He tried to turn over and sit up, but when he lifted his chest slightly, he immediately felt an unbearable pain in his chest. He could not help but groan and lie back down on the bed. Thus he turned his head and looked around. He opened his mouth and wanted to call for someone, but just as he was about to speak, his chest also hurt. He could not shout loudly and could only call out softly, "Is there anyone?" His voice was very weak, like a cat's meow. Who could hear it? Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua could still move his arm. Just as he wanted to move, he realized that his left hand was still tightly holding onto the small sword. Zhang Xiaohua sighed with emotion as he held the small sword in front of his eyes with difficulty. Looking at the familiar toy, he once again had doubts in his heart. What exactly was this? Was it really a toy? Normally, when practicing sword moves, it would be understandable to stab into a tree or a rock. However, the martial arts of the old man in black was something that even the disciples of the ethereal sect could not stab into his body with a long sword. For this small sword to be able to stab into his body so easily, it was really inconceivable. Moreover, this small sword was not sharpened. Zhang Xiaohua was thinking when he suddenly heard a clear voice. "You are awake?" Zhang Xiaohua turned his head to look. There was a little girl standing at the door with a figure similar to his. Her face was like a duck's egg, and it was a little red from the cold. Her big eyes were flashing with a trace of surprise, and she was holding a fishing rod in her hand. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Was this the child of a fisherman? She went fishing early in the morning to make a living? However, she did not look too beautiful, but the temperament between her eyebrows could not lie. What kind of fisherman's child would be so imposing? Sure enough, the girl quickly put down the fishing rod and shouted, "Wait here, I'll tell the master now." After saying that, she turned around and ran out. Her black hair fluttered, leaving behind a beautiful scenery. Not long after, the master quickly walked over and said happily, "God bless, you finally woke up in time. Let me take a look first." After saying that, she walked to Zhang Xiaohua's Kong and took his pulse. Then she transferred a strand of true qi into Zhang Xiaohua's body and said, "Not bad, child. You have recovered very well. In these 10 days, you were actually able to recover half of your injuries. Your body is really not ordinary. You are full of vitality. Sai, it's good to be young. You can recover so quickly from your injuries." Chapter 129. Hearing that she had been unconscious for more than 10 days, Zhang Xiaohua cursed in her heart. The attack on the rainy night was still vivid in her mind. She didn't know how Yan and the others were doing. That old man in black was probably killed by her. But were the people who came later really the Misty School's reinforcements? If Yan and the others were out of danger, they must be looking for her. More than 10 days had passed. Who knew where they had found her? She wanted to ask the mistress where she was, but she didn't even know where she had fallen into the water. She also didn't know how far she had drifted along the river. What was the point of asking? Thus Zhang Xiaohua could only force herself to stay awake. She looked at the mistress and said softly, "Thank you, mistress, for saving my life." The mistress touched her forehead and said with a smile, "This child is really sensible. If you want to talk about saving your life, you have to thank this girl first. If it wasn't for her fishing you out, who knows where you would be drifting now?" Fishing me out? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She immediately remembered that she saw the little girl holding the fishing rod and immediately understood. She looked at the little girl beside her with gratitude and said softly, "Then I still have to thank Miss for saving my life." The little girl smiled faintly and said, "You're welcome. I only saw you. Fishing you out and feeding you medicine were all due to the mistress. I don't dare to take the credit." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "No matter what, I still have to thank the mistress and miss for their kindness." The mistress saw that Zhang Xiaohua was a bit tired and said, "All right, since you're awake, take your time to recuperate. We can talk about these things later. Sleep for a while first." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he nodded his head slightly. He had only said a few words when he felt that his body was drained of energy. He just wanted to sleep. When he heard the abbess's instructions, he quietly closed his eyes and fell asleep not long after. When Zhang Xiaohua woke up again, it was already evening. With the little girl's help, Zhang Xiaohua struggled to eat something. Only then did she regain some energy. Not long after, the mistress also returned. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had woken up and was in good spirits, she was also full of joy. The mistress helped Zhang Xiaohua sit up and put the quilt behind his back. Then she put him on the quilt and the three of them began to talk. Naturally, the mistress asked about Zhang Xiaohua's origin. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "Mistress, my name is Zhang Xiaohua. I work in a Chinese medicine field in a mountain villa. This time, I went to the south with the owner of the villa to do something. On the way, we were attacked by bandits at night. I was beaten by an old man in black and fell into the river. As for the exact location of the villa and the owner's name, when I left the villa, someone specially told me not to reveal my whereabouts. I don't know their exact whereabouts now, but I think it's best to keep my promise and not tell you. What do you think?" In fact, the mistress didn't mean to get to the bottom of it. She was just asking. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua kept his promise, she was happy in her heart. She had been in the Jianghu for so many years, and it was rare to see such a simple child. Of course, the mistress didn't mean to make things difficult for Zhang Xiaohua. Just as the mistress was about to speak, the little girl next to her laughed out loud and said, "Xiaohua, your name sounds nice. Why does it sound like a girl's name? Xiaohua. Xiaohua. It reminds me of the little white flower on the top of the mountain." This was the second time that Zhang Xiaohua heard others say that his name was funny. However, seeing the little girl's flower-like smile, he didn't have any bad feelings. He only said weakly, "I don't think there's anything wrong with the name my parents gave me." "Then what's your name?" This was a very ordinary sentence, but in the little girl's ears it was like a thunderbolt. The little girl's face turned pale. She bit her lips and held back her tears. Under the mistress's pitiful gaze, she said, "I don't know what my name is. I seem to have forgotten everything, but at the same time I remember everything. But I just can't remember. My previous life seemed to be a dream. I can't explain it clearly." The mistress sighed and said, "I met her some time ago in the barren mountains. At that time she was also unconscious. When she woke up she had forgotten everything. She didn't even know her name." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Mistress is really a good person. You saved me and this little girl in a row. Your merit is boundless." "That's right, little girl. Since you were in a dream before, now that you've woken up, you have a new life. You should be happy. If you don't have a name, you can give it a new one. I think no matter if it's in a dream or not, you only need to keep your true self. How about I call you Meng?" When the little girl heard this, her eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Meng, that's right. All living things are dreams. I'm no exception. From now on I'll be called Meng." Thank you, Zhang Xiaohua." The mistress clapped her hands and said, "That's right. Zhang Xiaohua, you look like a scholar. How come you're a farmer?" Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, "My family was poor since I was young. When I was young I wasn't smart. My father didn't let me study much. During this time I read a lot of books, so I know some things. Little Meng saved me. so giving me a name can be considered as forming a good karma. Then Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, I still haven't asked for Shirtai's name. I'll remember it in my heart and repay you in the future. The Shirtai said with a smile, actually, you're not a person of Jianghu, so there's no harm in me telling you. However, for some reason you only need to remember that my name is Jingxian. And during this time, it's best to remember it in your heart and not tell others. Zhang Xiaohua said solemnly, I know Shirtai. Everyone has their own privacy and secrets. We should all give each other some space. I'm already happy that Shirtai doesn't blame me. I'll treat Shirtai's matter as normal. Shirtai said with a smile, Zhang Xiaohua's words are reasonable. Everyone knows that taking a step back makes the world better. But how many people understand? If they really understand, how much less bloody can there be in Jianghu? It's a pity that Jianghu is a place where fists matter. When your fists are hard, you'll have reason and won't care about other people's privacy and secrets. Zhang Xiaohua, I hope that when you grow up in the future, you can remember what you said today and do what you said. Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, I know Shirtai. I'll try my best to do it. The three of them talked for a while. Shirtai saw that Zhang Xiaohua was tired, so she let him rest and pulled Xiaoming out. In the next few days, Shirtai still went out early and came back late. Zhang Xiaohua's injury also recovered rapidly. Shirtai was very surprised by this situation. She had personally checked Zhang Xiaohua's injury. It was serious and abnormal. According to her idea, it would take at least a few months of rest. So she had been thinking about how to deal with this matter. Now it seemed that Zhang Xiaohua's recovery in these 10 days was comparable to others' recovery in 1 or 2 months. Was it really because her pill was effective? Or was it because Zhang Xiaohua was young and easy to recover? Looking at Shirtai's surprised eyes, Zhang Xiaohua also thought of her elder brother's injury that day. Didn't Zhang Xiaolong's internal injury recover very quickly last year? At that time, everyone thought that it was because of the spring water at home. She had been out for almost a year and had not drunk the spring water for a long time. Was it because she had drunk the spring water before? The spring water could cure internal injuries. This kind of thing was just thinking about. If she said it out loud, she would be said to have a brain problem for no reason. So Zhang Xiaohua could only keep her mouth shut. In fact, the reason why Zhang Xiaohua had been in a coma for more than 10 days was naturally because her body had automatically healed her injury. The longer she was in a coma, the better the recovery. Now that she had woken up, her injury was of course recovering rapidly. Zhang Xiaohua did not know this, and neither did Shirtai. However, it did not matter whether she knew or not. After all, Zhang Xiaohua was getting better day by day. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming were still in the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua could already walk on the ground. She slowly moved to the door of the cottage. Outside the door was the warm sunshine, which made Zhang Xiaohua feel warm. Xiaoming did not go fishing. She threw the fishing rod aside and also sat down barefoot. She asked Zhang Xiaohua, Brother Xiaohua, where is your home? Who is in your family? Can you tell me? I will definitely keep it a secret for you. I won't tell anyone. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Xiaoming's face in the sunshine and smiled. She said, This you can tell me. There is no need to keep it a secret. My family lives in Guozhuang House, a small village in Lu Town. However, don't ask me where Lu Town is. I have never seen a map, so I can't tell you clearly. My family now has my father and mother, as well as my elder brother and sister-in-law. Second brother and I came out to make a living. I used to have a grandmother who was very good to me. She just passed away last year. Speaking of his grandmother, Zhang Xiaohua thought of many things again. Therefore, he told Xiaoming about how he started to open up wasteland last year, dug wells, went to the market during the new year, met bullies and saved Lu Qian. In the end, he talked about how his elder brother met the bandits in Shitsue Mountain when he married, and how his grandmother passed away at his elder brother's wedding. He talked for a whole morning. In the end, not only did Zhang Xiaohua cry sadly, but even Xiaoming also cried. She was sad for the experience of Zhang Xiaohua's family, and the death of Zhang Xiaohua's beloved grandmother. Xiaoming looked at Zhang Xiaohua enviously and said, Brother Xiaohua, you have a harmonious and loving family. I really envy you. I don't know where my home is, and I don't know where to find it. Zhang Xiaohua comforted her and said, Everyone has a home and so do you. Maybe you don't know where to find it now, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a home. I believe that you will be able to find your home in the future, your father and mother. Moreover, Shirtai is very good to you now. She loves you as much as her mother. Xiaoming said with a smile, Xiaohua, you are right. I must have a home, and like you, I must have a lot of family stories. My family is also very loving. When I remember or find it, I will tell you, okay? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, no problem, Xiaoming. I believe I will wait until the day you tell me. Moreover, if there is a chance in the future, I am very willing to invite you to our Guozhuang house. My father, mother, elder brother and sister-in-law will all like you very much. Xiaoming also smiled. Her smile was like a flower, and in an instant, the slightly cold shell just now faded away. Perhaps this was the true temperament of a teenage girl. At this moment, Xiaoming only wanted to stretch out her small hand and make a pinky promise with the youth who was still recuperating. But when her small hand was halfway out, she thought that this was just a young game. Perhaps it was not suitable for her to do so at this age. A blush appeared on her face, and she quickly withdrew her small hand. The youth in front of her looked extremely ordinary, and his face was pale because of his illness. However, he was the first playmate in her memory. Although this playmate was most likely lying on the bed, the home he mentioned gave Xiaoming perfect expectations. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua's home, Zhang Xiaohua's people, and Zhang Xiaohua's things all left a very deep impression on Xiaoming. Shirtai gave her the care of an elder, while Zhang Xiaohua gave her the joy of a companion. This perhaps was called fate? The sun was shining brightly, and the river was gurgling. On this endless continent, there might be stories of joys and sorrows happening every day. However, at this time, it belonged to the boys and girls beside the cottage. Only with support and trust would there be hope and a future. That night, Shirtai came back very late. He also looked extremely tired. However, Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming had never been nosy people, so they did not ask much. The next day, Shirtai did not go out, which was unusual. Instead, he called Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming to the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua had a premonition. As expected, Shirtai first checked Zhang Xiaohua's injuries, and then said, Zhang Xiaohua, your injuries have stabilized. There are no major problems. In the future, you just need to rest. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly bowed and said, this is all thanks to you, Shirtai. Thank you so much. Shirtai smiled and said, you are still so polite. We have lived together for more than 10 days, and I even see you as my nephew. Don't mention the words of thanks again. However, the end of the year is approaching, and I can't stay here any longer. Tomorrow, we will set off for the encampment of our sect. Xiaoming will go with me. What about you? What are your plans? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked Shirtai, what do you think I should do? Shirtai said, your injuries are not serious. You can barely go with us. There may be changes on the way, but with me it won't be too serious. I can put you in the nearest town and then you can make your own plans. You can find a way back or you can recuperate in the town. Zhang Xiaohua asked again, then Shirtai, I want to ask again. Xiaoming, what are your plans? Shirtai smiled and said, as for Xiaoming, I plan to take her back to the sect first. Her aptitude is average and she is old. Although it is not suitable for her to practice martial arts, it is not difficult for me to take her in with my status. Let's not talk about practicing any peerless martial arts. As long as she can protect herself and live a stable life in the future, it will be enough. Xiaoming had been worried about her future, but she was indifferent and sometimes was too lazy to ask. This time when she saw Zhang Xiaohua asking for her and Shirtai thinking for her so thoroughly, her eyes could not help but turn red. She walked to the Shirtai, pulled her sleeve and said, Shirtai, thank you. Shirtai lovingly touched Xiaoming's head and said, Xiaoming, it is my fate to meet you. Looking at you now, you have the shadow of me in the past. Since I have some ability to take care of you, I am naturally willing to help you. In this Jianghu, it is not necessarily full of schemes and tricks. There is also warmth. Xiaoming seemed to understand and nodded. When Zhang Xiaohua heard that there was such a good thing, he cried, Shirtai, you accept one disciple, 2 disciples are also accepted. Why don't you accept me as your disciple? Shirtai smiled and said, although there are male disciples in our sect, they have never been pro-disciples. Male disciples also belong to the outer sect. I can't accept male disciples. If you are willing to go to our sect, I can consider finding someone to accept you. However, you are old and have passed the best time to practice martial arts. This martial art may not be able to succeed. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was cold. Why did these masters have this argument? Forget it. Thinking of Yan's promise, he was still a little disheartened and said, I just want Shirtai to teach me. If it is someone else, then forget it. Shirtai said, You child, to be able to enter my sect, even if you are an outer sect disciple, the requirements are extremely high. However, she didn't want to say the name of the sect, nor did she want to force Zhang Xiaohua, so she didn't say anything more. Zhang Xiaohua said again, Abbess, I've thought about it and decided that I won't follow you to the nearest town. As you said just now, there are still some problems. First, I'm afraid that if anything happens, it will affect your plans. Second, if you bring me along, won't it also affect your itinerary? I'll just stay here and recuperate from my injuries. Besides, this place is near the river, so my companions might find their way here in the next few days. If I leave now, won't I miss them again? Shirtai was silent for a moment and said, Zhang Xiaohua, what you said makes sense. It's better to be quiet than to move. You'd better recuperate here. The surroundings are very safe and there is enough food for you to spend the new year. By the way, I'll tell you the route to the town later. Don't get lost in the end. After saying that, Shirtai told Zhang Xiaohua the route from the cottage to the town in detail. Then she took out some silver from her arms and gave it to Zhang Xiaohua. Only then did she take Xiaoming out to pack their things. Perhaps it was the last time she would spend with Shirtai and Xiaoming. Zhang Xiaohua felt that time passed abnormally fast. Unknowingly, it was evening. The sun was setting, and a faint red color hung on the west mountain. Zhang Xiaohua held her cheeks and sat alone by the river. At this time, Xiaoming quietly walked over. Like Zhang Xiaohua, Xiaoming sat by the river with one hand behind her back. She looked at the sun in the distance and asked, What are you thinking about? Zhang Xiaohua said, I'm thinking that the ancients said that the sunset is infinitely good. It's just that dusk is near. This beautiful time is always short. Xiaoming was also sad and said, It's precisely because it's short that it's beautiful. If it lasts for a long time, it will be boring. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Xiaoming is right. We've only met for more than 10 days. Naturally, it feels good. If it's more than 10 years, what will happen? Xiaoming's face was a little red. She didn't know if Zhang Xiaohua said it unintentionally, or if she listened attentively, or if it was the reflection of the setting sun. Please collect it, thank you. Chapter 130. In fact, Xiaoming was still thinking too much. Zhang Xiaohua was just expressing his feelings. He didn't have any girls to play with since he was young. These 10 days were when his body was at its weakest. Suddenly, there was a girl around his age who took care of him and talked to him. He felt very good. Naturally, he would think about how it would feel after a long time. How could he know anything now? Of course, he didn't know what was the first awakening of love. Then Zhang Xiaohua said, It can be considered fate to accompany you in this wilderness. However, after parting today, I don't know when we will meet again. Looking at Shirtai's intention, you have to practice martial arts well. When your martial arts are great, when you go to Jianghu to do chivalrous deeds, you may be able to meet again. Xiaoming thought and said, Gid Xiaohua, I don't know which sect Shirtai is in. Can you tell me where you are? Zhang Xiaohua was silent and said, I didn't join any sect. I only practice some incomplete fist techniques. As for other things, I told you everything I can. This is related to the safety of some people. It's better if I don't say. Poor Zhang Xiaohua. Why didn't he know anything about a girl's thoughts? Can't you just say a few more words? However, it was his behavior that made Xiaoming feel that he was different from others. Xiaoming nodded and said, I know that Xiaohua Gij is from Lu Town and lives in the Guozhuang house. That's enough. Then Xiaoming bit her lower lip. The hand that had been behind her back stretched out in front of her eyes. She said to Zhang Xiaohua with a trembling voice, Xiaohua Gij, after parting today, I don't know when we will meet again. I found this in my own purse. I carry it with me. I don't remember its origin, but it looks a little familiar. It must be something that belongs to me. Now I will give it to you as a souvenir. When Zhang Xiaohua looked carefully, he saw that the jade-like girl was holding a pair of pearl hair clips. He couldn't help but be shocked. He waved his hand and said, "How can I dare to accept such a precious thing?" Xiao Ming said angrily, "What's so precious about it? Was it because it was valuable? But even if it was worth a lot of money, if no one used it, how much money would it be worth if it was casually thrown away? But even if it was a worthless item, if someone cherished it, wouldn't it be more valuable than this item that no one wanted? If you don't want it, I'll just throw it into the river." After that, he was about to throw it away. Zhang Xiaohua saw this and hurriedly said, "Don't throw it away. I'll take it." He hurriedly caught it with his hand and muttered in his heart, "This is worth 4 or 5 taels of silver. Wouldn't it be a pity to throw it into the water for no reason?" How could Xiao Ming hear his thoughts? Seeing him take it, she also smiled sweetly. However, after that, Zhang Xiaohua rummaged through his body. Then he awkwardly took out his toy sword and handed it to Xiao Ming. Xiao Ming didn't know why, but she reached out to take it. Unexpectedly, the toy was very heavy. She wasn't careful and almost slipped to the ground. Xiao Ming used her strength to hold it in her hand. Then she heard Zhang Xiaohua say apologetically, "The ancients said that it was impolite to come and go. But after searching all over my body, I only have this one thing. How about I give it to you as a souvenir?" Xiao Ming looked at this abnormally heavy and black thing. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "Such a precious thing, how do you want me to hold it?" The word heavy was pronounced very heavily. Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head and spread out his hands. He said, "But I only have this one thing." Xiao Ming saw that he really gave it to her. Her eyes turned and she said with a smile, "Then I'll accept it. However, this little thing is too heavy. It's not convenient for me to hold it. How about I leave it with you first?" After saying this, she laboriously handed it over. Zhang Xiaohua tilted his head and thought for a moment. Then he took it and said, "Then it's a deal. From now on, this thing is yours. I'm just temporarily keeping it." Xiao Ming smiled and nodded. But when Zhang Xiaohua put the small sword into his arms, he still felt that it wasn't appropriate. He tilted his head and thought for a moment. Then he patted his forehead and said, "Got it." Then from the pair of pearl hair clips in his hand, he took out one and gave it to Xiao Ming. He said, "You give this pearl hair clip to me. It's mine. I'll give you another one. How about we each take half?" When Xiao Ming heard this, her face flushed red. It seemed that blood was about to drip down. She looked at the pearl hair clip in her small hand. She didn't know whether to take it or not. She just wanted to give her first playmate a souvenir. But this Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have misunderstood something. If this pair of pearl hair clips was taken by a man and a woman, what would it become? What did it mean? Was Zhang Xiaohua hinting at something? Should she take it or not? Should she explain it to him? She had a trace of affection for Zhang Xiaohua, but it shouldn't be to this extent. It seemed that whether to take it or not was a problem. However, immediately, Zhang Xiaohua's words fell into her ears. "This pair of pearl hair clips is worth 4 taels of silver. I'll keep half of it, which is only 2 taels of silver. My heart can be considered stable." Xiao Ming's face was still red. She fiercely glared at Zhang Xiaohua, stamped her feet, and snatched the pearl hair clip from Zhang Xiaohua's hand. She rebuked, "Stable your dead head." After that, she turned around and ran back to the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be stunned on the spot. He murmured, "Wasn't it fine just now? I kindly gave you a pearl hair clip. How did it become like this?" Then Zhang Xiaohua subconsciously looked at the sky and muttered, "It's not raining today. Why are you in such a hurry to go back? You don't need to take the clothes." Until the night's rest, Xiao Ming's face was as cold as ice. She didn't give him any smile. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know what he had done to offend her. When he woke up the next day, Zhang Xiaohua found a small cloth bag beside the Kong. He opened it and saw some scattered silver inside. He couldn't help but feel a little warm in his heart. At the same time, he also had a bad premonition. So he took the cloth bag and hurried out. Sure enough, the house was empty. Shirtai and Xiao Ming had left long before dawn. Zhang Xiaohua held the warm cloth bag in his hand. He understood that Shirtai was really a good person. He had already given him some silver yesterday. Now that he was leaving, he was afraid that he wouldn't have enough. The next time he saw him, he must pay him back double. However, he didn't notice that the cloth bag with silver was Xiao Ming's handkerchief. This was normal. As long as it was something with silver, he would only look at silver. Zhang Xiaohua stood at the door of the cottage and was stunned for a moment. Then, he came back to his senses and went back to the house in disappointment. When the Shirtai left, she must have come to his house to say goodbye. However, she couldn't wake him up. He must be surprised. This was also good. He left quietly and didn't take away any clouds. He didn't want to hold hands and look at each other with tears. He was speechless. At this time, a person dozens of miles away was also thinking, why does Zhang Xiaohua sleep like a pig? He doesn't wake up no matter how I call him. There were usually 3 people in the cottage. Suddenly there were 2 less people. The loneliness increased greatly. During this time, Xiao Ming didn't leave his side and often talked to him. Although Shirtai didn't appear in the cottage usually, Zhang Xiaohua could always see her sooner or later. So, he felt that there were people in the cottage usually. Today, he was left alone in the cottage. He felt bored every moment. Since Zhang Xiaohua learned how to read, he had been using books to pass the time. Now where would there be books in this shabby cottage? So, he came to the open space in front of the cottage again. He wanted to get into a posture and practice the Big Dipper magical fist. However, after just a few moves and some twists and turns, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He had to stop with cold sweat on his face. What should he do? However, Zhang Xiaohua saw the small mountain not far from the cottage and had a new idea. He had been in the cottage for a long time, but he had never stepped out of the cottage. Now it was the same. It was a good thing to go to the back. So not long after, Zhang Xiaohua took a small stick that he found in the cottage and used it as a crutch. Holding it with his left hand, he walked to the back of the cottage step by step. However, just as he turned around the cottage, he found that there was a very high hill behind the cottage. With his current illness, it would be difficult to climb over. Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to walk along the side of the hill. He just wanted to find a place where the slope was slightly lower. As expected, after walking for a while, there was a place where the slope was slightly lower. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and carefully climbed up with the help of the small stick. When he reached the top of the hill, he saw a different scene. This was a flat land full of trees. The bleak winter wind blew all the trees in his eyes, leaving only bare branches reaching to the sky. The ground was full of fallen leaves and weeds. The hill that he saw in the cottage was at the end of his vision. It was also the end of the forest. At a glance, he didn't know how far it was. Zhang Xiaohua walked along the high hill for a while, and found a place where he could go down. Then he slid down the high hill. The forest was full of fallen leaves. It was very comfortable to walk up. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and walked forward. There were some birds chirping in the forest. The chirping was very moving. Occasionally, there were the sounds of small animals jumping between the branches. Zhang Xiaohua heard it clearly. They should be squirrels. Even after walking for a while, he heard the hurried sounds of leaves and weeds in the forest. At first, Zhang Xiaohua thought that there were people walking like him, but the sounds were hurried and intermittent. After listening for a while, he suddenly realized that it was probably some rabbits looking for food for winter. Thinking of small animals, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Life in the cottage was very peaceful. They didn't even have to eat meat. It had been a long time since he smelled meat. He was craving it. If he could catch a rabbit or something like that to eat, how good would that be? But what about his own injuries? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the small walking stick in his hand and gave up this idea for the time being. Zhang Xiaohua continued forward for a while, and looked up at the small mountain again. It was still not far away. Only then did he understand the true meaning of the phrase, "A mountain runs to its death." If he insisted on continuing forward, he would be exhausted to death today. So be it. He just came out for a walk. There was no reason for him to be exhausted. He casually picked up a few dry branches on the ground and turned back. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua thought of a problem. The Shirtai went out early and came back late every day. In this place where birds shit every day, what was there to be busy with? However, the Shirtai's lightness skill was very good. Naturally, she could move around a wide range. Maybe she was looking for something? Maybe she was looking for someone. Maybe she was thinking about the problem, or maybe she was going back the way she came. But not long after, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the front of the high slope. Looking at the high slope that he had to climb up with difficulty, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but shake his head. The Shirtai had its own way of doing things. Wasn't he worried for the ancient people? Zhang Xiaohua shook his head and began to climb up the ladder. Walking back to the cottage, Zhang Xiaohua was already covered in sweat. However, his body was also very comfortable. Life was about exercise. The ancient people didn't lie to him. The rest of the time was also boring. Zhang Xiaohua took the fishing rod left by Xiaoming and wanted to go fishing. However, he couldn't find a suitable bait near the cottage. He had to learn from Xiaoming and throw the fishing line into the river. Looking at the flowing river, he prayed that the fish would take the bait. Presumably, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was not sincere. God didn't hear his prayer. God didn't send him any fish and he didn't catch anything. However, this boring time was spent by Zhang Xiaohua. After a few more days, Zhang Xiaohua felt much better. Then he tried to practice boxing again. Although there were many places where he still couldn't fully perform, his hands and feet became more flexible. He didn't look sick anymore. It was getting colder day by day. However, Zhang Xiaohua had a question that he couldn't figure out. He remembered that when winter came last year, he was still very afraid of the cold and wore a cotton-padded jacket early. However, he didn't know how it was this year. The cold wind was blowing. Although the snow hadn't fallen yet, it was already cold. He was still wearing the jacket that he wore when he came out of the Huanxi mountain villa. Why didn't he feel cold? It was really strange. Was this place already in the south? Was it not as cold as the Guozhuang house in winter? After immersing himself in the boxing for a few days, Zhang Xiaohua didn't find the answer to his problem. However, the problem of boxing was solved with time. Zhang Xiaohua could now perform the whole set of Fist of the North Star with difficulty. The Fist of the North Star was also magical. No matter how slow or fast Zhang Xiaohua's speed was, as long as he practiced it over and over again, the flow would definitely appear by the 9th time. Of course, the difference was still in the amount of the flow. In the past, when Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing in the mountain villa, he could only produce 3 different flows of hot and cold in the morning and at night. Since he didn't have to farm in the cottage, he spent all his time practicing boxing. However, after repeated practice, he found that the flow didn't appear without limit. Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing 81 times a day. After 9 flows appeared in his body, no matter how fast or slow Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing, the flow would never appear again. Could it be that the flow could only appear 9 times a day? Actually, in addition to practicing boxing, Zhang Xiaohua also tried to practice the sword moves that Elder Yu taught him. This time, he was able to kill the black-robed old man in the night attack completely because of this sword move. Zhang Xiaohua deeply understood the importance of these 16 life-saving changes. How could he not practice properly? Unfortunately, this sword move couldn't be compared to boxing. It was basically flashing and moving in the air. After practicing for a while, Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt that his body couldn't take it anymore and stopped. However, it wasn't without results. When Zhang Xiaohua stopped, he immediately thought that if he had immediately performed other changes after stabbing the black-robed old man's throat, that palm that almost killed him wouldn't have hit him. Of course, this was just a thought. However, there were only changes in the sword move and no changes in the footwork. This sword move would always be a heroic suicide. Zhang Xiaohua's state of mind was probably far from reaching that level. Zhang Xiaohua's boxing was practiced day by day. He also slowly practiced his sword moves. His body was also getting better day by day. However, there was still no news of the person he was waiting for. No matter if it was on land, no one passed by. Even in the river, there were no boats. Sometimes Zhang Xiaohua was a little puzzled. How did this Shirtai find this cottage? Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant. Should he wait or not? Perhaps he should have left with the Shirtai at that time. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was hesitating, the first snow of the new year finally fell. Actually, as for whether it was the new year or not, Zhang Xiaohua already couldn't remember. However, when he saw the snow, he naturally thought of the new year. He would just take it as an auspicious sign of the new year. Since the first time, Zhang Xiaohua had also gone to the woods behind the cottage several times. However, he returned empty-handed. Now that it was snowing heavily, it was a good opportunity to hunt. One morning, Zhang Xiaohua took his small crutch again and went straight to the high slope behind the cottage. Everyone had a habit, and Zhang Xiaohua was no exception. He still took the route that he had chosen for the first time. When Zhang Xiaohua walked into this snow-white world, not only did he feel that the world was full of ice and snow, but he also felt lucky that there were many animal footprints on the thick snow. He guessed that he wouldn't return empty-handed this time. However, when Zhang Xiaohua really walked into the woods, he realized how wrong he was. The thick snow was either flat as before, or there were countless shallow and small traces. Where could he find the footprints of rabbits and other animals? On this vast land, it seemed that only his footprints came from afar. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and identified the direction. He walked towards the distant hill. Perhaps there would be delicious prey there. Perhaps it was snowing. Along the way, Zhang Xiaohua rarely heard the chirping of birds. He guessed that they were all hiding in their nests and slacking off. According to Zhang Xiaohua's observation, there were no traces of animals on the snow. However, there was nothing strange. The snow was still falling. Perhaps it had been buried long ago. After walking for a while, the hill still seemed to be far away. However, this time Zhang Xiaohua was determined. Thinking of hunting there, he didn't give up early like the previous times, unless he could find rabbits in the woods. However, cunning rabbits always had 3 burrows. How could Zhang Xiaohua, who didn't have much hunting experience, find them? Therefore, the greedy Zhang Xiaohua could only trudge on the snow with difficulty. Please collect. Thank you. Chapter 131. Zhang Xiaohua walked for a whole morning, but the snow seemed to show no signs of stopping. The more he walked, the more inconvenient it became. From time to time, there was a tendency for him to slip. Zhang Xiaohua could only carefully rely on the small walking stick. In the forest, the world was full of snow and branches. In addition to the falling snowflakes, there was only the squeaking sound of Zhang Xiaohua's feet stepping on the snow. In this environment, it was actually impossible to distinguish between north and south. Not to distinguish between north and south, but to Zhang Xiaohua, who had no sense of direction, there was not much difference. He only needed to look up at the small mountain. After not looking for a while, he suddenly looked up and found that he was much closer to the small mountain. However, Zhang Xiaohua's interest was not in the mountain, but the animals that could be eaten. After walking for a long time, he did not find the wild rabbits that were commonly seen on the mountain of Guozhuang House. Even the squirrels jumping on the trees were rare. How could he catch them to eat? Zhang Xiaohua was more and more surprised. However, if the squirrels hibernating in the tree hole knew Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts, perhaps they would collectively wake up from their hibernation and bite him together. We usually dance on the tree. It's fine if you admire us. Now that the snow has sealed the mountain, we are sleeping. You want to eat us? Do you want us to live? If scholarly Jinfeng knew, he would secretly give him a copy of Man and Nature, and then secretly feel ashamed. It was because of the teacher's laziness that he did not teach strictly. Zhang Xiaohua looked around just like this as he ceaselessly moved forward. As he walked, his eyelids suddenly twitched, and he immediately stopped moving. When he narrowed his eyes and looked ahead, he couldn't help but be overjoyed in his heart. Wasn't there a gray-colored and plump wild rabbit a few tens of steps away from him? Was that not the braised rabbit leg that he had been yearning for day and night? Since she had found her prey, Zhang Xiaohua began to carefully move forward. She moved lightly, afraid that she would disturb the dazed rabbit's state of mind. Unfortunately, even though Zhang Xiaohua had the experience of chasing chickens and rabbits when he was young, it was just a child's play. When it came to real hunting, he was far from being able to catch this silly rabbit in the snow. Look, when he was only a few feet away, the rabbit's long ears shook, and it immediately broke free from the state of being one with the rabbit. It was no longer a silly rabbit. At this moment, it had inherited the glorious tradition of the rabbit spirits. The souls of Bugs Bunny, Roger Rabbit, and Zhang Xiaohua were all possessed at this moment. At this moment, this silly rabbit was no longer a rabbit facing Zhang Xiaohua. It was all the rabbits that were being hunted. At this moment it ran away, quickly distancing itself from Zhang Xiaohua. Rabbit run. How could Zhang Xiaohua let the braised rabbit leg that was right in front of his mouth escape? He immediately chased after it, throwing the situation of his body's injuries to the back of his mind. Alas, sometimes the human body could still control the body. Thus, the man and the rabbit began a chase in the snowy wilderness. That rabbit was clever, running very fast and changing directions from time to time, making it very difficult for Zhang Xiaohua to chase. On the other hand, although Zhang Xiaohua did not run very fast, he had the advantage of continuously exerting his strength. This horse dance took half a day, and his physical fitness was not for show. After chasing for a while, he did not feel anything. It was just that the injuries in his body had not healed, and there was pain from time to time, which did not allow him to exert his full strength. He could only maintain a certain speed, chase after the rabbit, and wait for the rabbit to be tired, and then capture it in one fell swoop. Zhang Xiaohua's little abacus crackled loudly, and his strategy was also very correct. Indeed, after chasing for a while, the rabbit's footsteps slowed down slightly. Zhang Xiaohua laughed in his heart, and put more strength into his feet. But as he chased, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes suddenly lit up. In front of him was a flat open ground, and not far from the flat ground was the small mountain that he had always wanted to see. It turned out that during the chase between the man and the rabbit, he had already unknowingly run out of the big forest. However, with the prey in front of him, Zhang Xiaohua did not have the time to admire the scene of a dancing silver snake in the field, and only chased after the rabbit that was also slightly dazed. The rabbit was also not careless. Hearing the sound behind it, it put more strength into it, and ran diagonally towards the small mountain. Not long after, it ran to the front of the mountain. The rabbit also changed its speed from just now and ran slower. It must have been exhausted by Zhang Xiaohua's chase, but the mountain in front of it was not as high as the slope behind the cottage. It was very steep, so how could the rabbit climb up? It originally thought that it was a way to escape, but when it got closer, it found that it was a hopeless situation. The rabbit paused for a while, and ran along the mountain in a direction. Zhang Xiaohua naturally chased all the way. The rabbit ran slower and slower, and Zhang Xiaohua was getting closer and closer. Just a few more steps, Zhang Xiaohua could reach out and catch it. However, at this moment, the rabbit suddenly stopped and sniffed around with its nose. Its long ears turned, and it looked back at Zhang Xiaohua, and then turned its head and ran towards the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua saw this from behind, and could not help but be amused. Could it be that this silly rabbit had become stupid after being chased by her? Running into a rock by itself? The ancients said that the cloud could protect the tree and wait for the rabbit. They really did not deceive her. However, what happened next made Zhang Xiaohua's jaw drop. The silly rabbit ran into the mountain rock, but it did not die as Zhang Xiaohua had imagined. Instead, she felt a faint light flash, and the gray rabbit, the rabbit that Zhang Xiaohua had been chasing for the whole morning, actually disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua ran closer, and rubbed her eyes in disbelief, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. If it was not for the traces of the rabbit running through the snow, Zhang Xiaohua really thought that she was dreaming this whole morning. Zhang Xiaohua foolishly walked in front of the mountain rock where the rabbit disappeared. He did not dare to touch it with his hands, and only used the small walking stick to poke at the mountain rock. He did not find anything unusual, and the walking stick did not disappear, so he poked at the nearby stone wall again. Sure enough, he soon found something unusual. The place where the rabbit disappeared was in a circular area about half a person's height. Although there was no abnormal feeling when the walking stick poked it, but there were no snowflakes floating down, nor were there any gravel or mud falling down from above. And to the side, it was the same as Zhang Xiaohua's understanding. It could be brushed off the snowflakes, but if one used too much strength, some mud would fall from above. It was clear that if something was out of the ordinary, there must be something fishy about it. Then Zhang Xiaohua used the walking stick to test the bottom. In the place where the rabbit's traces disappeared, there was an area about 1 foot square that the walking stick could reach. It was as if there was an invisible hole here. Seeing his small walking stick easily reach into the stone wall, Zhang Xiaohua still could not believe that this was the truth. The walking stick was about to reach the end, but the hole was still bottomless. When the stone wall was close to the hand of the walking stick, Zhang Xiaohua stopped, hesitated for a moment, and then reached in. He knew that his hand had disappeared, leaving only his wrist stuck in the stone wall. Only then did he truly believe that there was a hole here. When Zhang Xiaohua withdrew his walking stick in hand, he stood in the snow and carefully thought. What exactly was inside this thing? Should he take the risk and go in to take a look? Zhang Xiaohua was no less curious about the young man. However, if he had to go into an unknown hole just for a wild rabbit or a trace of curiosity, Zhang Xiaohua would never do it. He knew that curiosity killed the cat. However, if he went back to the cottage empty-handed, Zhang Xiaohua was also not willing to do it. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the forest arrogantly. However, when he was about halfway, Zhang Xiaohua bent down, crawled on the snow, and quietly poked his head out. Just right he could see the stone wall. Zhang Xiaohua started to make a living by waiting for rabbits. However, after waiting for a while, the wild rabbit still did not come out. Zhang Xiaohua was a little annoyed. Maybe the rabbit was too smart. It hid in there and then it was free. Maybe it was dangerous inside and the rabbit had already died. Maybe there was another way out and the rabbit had already run away? Thinking that the rabbit had already run away and he was still foolishly crawling on the snow, Zhang Xiaohua thought of something. But at that moment, a wild rabbit's head suddenly popped out of the hard stone wall. From afar it looked very strange. The wild rabbit's head had long ears. It looked left and right before shrinking back. Then, it jumped out of the stone wall and ran off into the distance along the small mountain peak. Seeing the wild rabbit run out, Zhang Xiaohua did not immediately chase after it. Instead, he crouched there and waited for a while. After making sure that nothing else would jump out of the stone wall, he slowly walked over. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua was crouching on the snow just now, he had already made up his mind. If the rabbit could come out, it would not be dangerous. Moreover, there was no other way. It was very likely to be a closed place. Moreover, the hole was only 1 foot wide. A slightly bigger animal would not be able to get in. Therefore, there should not be any danger. If the rabbit went in and did not come out, then Zhang Xiaohua did not have the courage to go in and play around. When he got close to the stone wall, Zhang Xiaohua stopped again. He crouched down and reached in with his walking stick again. This time he wanted to see if it was a long and narrow passage or a space that could allow a person to stand up. Sure enough, when his hand reached in, he exerted force and the walking stick stood up. It did not encounter any obstacles. Zhang Xiaohua knew what was going on. Then he took out the small sword from his pocket and held it in his left hand and the walking stick in his right hand. First he reached in and shook it for a moment. Then he gritted his teeth and crouched on the snow, climbing stiffly towards the 1 foot wide stone wall. Zhang Xiaohua, who was crouching on the ground, only felt his vision blur. Then he entered another place. Wasn't this a cave? He was crouching on the snow in front of the cave. When Zhang Xiaohua stood up and looked carefully, there was something like a thick fog behind him. There was light coming in from the outside, but he could not see the scene outside. The snowflakes were still as big as outside, falling from the top of his head through the fog. On the snow, there were still traces of the rabbits jumping. In front of him, there was a small cave that was commonly seen on the mountain peak. It was slightly taller than Zhang Xiaohua, but it was pitch black inside. He could not see clearly. The traces of the rabbit led to the inside. It was very messy. The rabbit must have entered and exited several times. Seeing such a scene, Zhang Xiaohua's heart tensed up a little. However, he still threw the walking stick in his hand into the cave first. When he heard a dang sound from inside, there was no other sound. He then took out the fire starter from his pocket and carefully lit it. He held it in his right hand and the small sword in his left hand in front of his chest. Step by step, he walked into the pitch-black cave. When he walked into the cave, he carefully looked around with the fire starter. Only then did he feel completely relieved. This was an ordinary cave, the size of a small house. In the innermost part, there was a rectangular stone strip. Next to the stone strip, there was a stone table. There were a few small stone benches around. On the stone table, there was a money bag and a small square stone. The rest was empty. Then there was the small walking stick lying on the ground. Seeing the scene in front of him, Zhang Xiaohua secretly frowned. What was this place? It was so mysterious. There was nothing inside, only a money bag? He was not in a hurry to take the money bag. It was on the stone table. Sooner or later it would be his. He could take it according to his mood. Therefore he still did not give up. He took the fire starter and carefully looked around the cave. He even picked up the walking stick and knocked on the stone wall. However, other than seeing some spherical pits on the stone wall, he did not find anything. That pit was a little high. Zhang Xiaohua's fingers could not reach it. He deliberately used the walking stick to poke at it, but he did not find anything. Only then did he give up and came to the front of the stone table. Zhang Xiaohua took the small sword and picked up the money bag. He moved it. Seeing that there was nothing unusual, he moved the small square stone. It was also normal. Only then did he put the small sword back into his pocket. He picked up the stone with his left hand and looked at it carefully with the fire starter in front of his eyes. However, when he looked left, right, up and down, why couldn't he see any difference between it and the pebbles by the river? Could it be because of the different shape? Zhang Xiaohua angrily threw the stone back on the stone table. He picked up the money bag full of expectations. However, when he picked it up lightly, his heart immediately floated. The enthusiasm in his heart turned into snow. He thought that this money bag would at least be filled with a few pieces of silver. It would be best if it could be filled with a few pieces of gold. That would be good. However, the first feeling in his hand told him that it was empty. Zhang Xiaohua did not give up and squeezed with all his strength. However, he did not pinch anything out of it. He then shook it down, but he did not shake out a single rabbit hair. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be filled with regret. If he had known earlier, he would have caught that silly rabbit first. At least he could have a good meal at night. This was great. An empty money bag, a broken stone, nothing to do, and also a lot of time to crawl in the snow. Zhang Xiaohua curled his lips. Just as he was about to throw the money bag back to the stone table, he twisted it with 2 fingers. He felt that the cloth of the money bag was not bad. It was quite delicate. Besides, he did not have a money bag. The silver that the master gave him was still in a piece of cloth. Now it was just right. Zhang Xiaohua put the fire starter on the stone table. He took out the scattered silver from his pocket and poured it all into the money bag. He tied the mouth and threw it up and down in the air. Then he caught it. The feeling was quite good. At least this trip was not in vain. After that, Zhang Xiaohua was about to take the fire starter from the stone table. At this time his eyes fell on the stone. You said that if this was an ordinary stone, would someone be bored enough to put it on the table? Perhaps there was some mystery inside that he could not see through? Forget it. He would rather see wrongly than let it go. How could he have the time to return to a treasure mountain? Even if it was a small stone, he would still take it away. Thus Zhang Xiaohua picked up the small square stone again and threw it into the money bag. He put it into his pocket and then picked up the fire starter. He looked around again and then slowly walked out of the cave. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the inconceivable thick fog in front of the cave. It was very strange. In such a mystical place, how could there be nothing mystical left for him? Even if there was a bag full of gold, he would not be surprised. But it just had to be an empty money bag. Suddenly, he thought of a problem. Why was there a 1-foot hole in the fog that he could enter? Someone must have been here. Since someone had been here, how could there be anything left for him? This empty money bag must have been taken by someone and casually thrown down. And that small white square stone must have been thrown away by someone. Zhang Xiaohua sighed in his heart. Forget it. His luck was not on his side. Even if he picked up a money bag, it was not bad. At least it was worth his scattered silver. After calming himself down, Zhang Xiaohua prepared to go out. The snow at the entrance of the cave was even heavier. The traces of him entering were almost covered up. Zhang Xiaohua picked up his walking stick again and bent down. He slowly drilled out of the invisible hole. Then an inconceivable scene appeared on the stone wall outside. First, a stick poked out from the hard stone wall. Then a young man's head poked out. Then he slowly crawled out until his whole body came out. Luckily, there was no one else in the wilderness. There was no need to shock the world. When Zhang Xiaohua crawled out, he looked around. It was already late. The forest was still the same. There were still no wild rabbits. Zhang Xiaohua patted the snow and mud off his body. Looking at the stone wall behind him, which was no different from the other parts of the mountain, he followed the footprints that were not covered by the snow and went back the way he came. After Zhang Xiaohua left, the snow became heavier. Not long after, the falling snow covered Zhang Xiaohua's footprints. Before dusk fell, there were no traces left. Only a plain empty space was left. At this time, poor Zhang Xiaohua, who had no sense of direction, could still vaguely recognize the footprints that were about to be covered by the snow. He quickly ran towards the cottage. As he ran, he secretly prayed that he would not get lost. Perhaps Zhang Xiaohua's prayer was effective, or perhaps it was because he had been to this forest many times before. When dusk fell, Zhang Xiaohua saw a high slope in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but rejoice in his heart. His tense mood relaxed, but at this moment, his right foot suddenly kicked something hard. It did not look like a rock, nor did it look like a branch. When Zhang Xiaohua picked it up with his hand and brought it to his eyes, he vaguely saw that it was a frozen wild rabbit. Please collect it. Thank you. Chapter 132. In the evening, Zhang Xiaohua finally ate the rabbit meat that she had been yearning for day and night. However, it was not braised. Although Zhang Xiaohua was born in a poor family and had been helping out at home since he was young, he was still a boy after all. The work he had done was in the fields. The work on the stove was still relatively unfamiliar to him. The closest thing he had done was to fetch spring water from the stove at home. Therefore, although she wanted to braise it, she simply peeled the rabbit's skin and learned from her father's way of handling chickens. She simply cleaned the rabbit and put it in the pot to cook. When the water boiled and the meat was cooked, although there was no seasoning, it still smelled fragrant. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel hungry. Then, Zhang Xiaohua closed her eyes and silently muttered in her heart, "I'm eating braised rabbit meat. I'm eating braised rabbit meat." Then she was not afraid of the heat. She fished out the whole rabbit from the pot and chewed happily. Her mouth was full of oil. She was very happy. Until Zhang Xiaohua ate up the whole rabbit meat and licked the bare bones reluctantly. She threw the bones into the river in front of her. However, in the winter, the river that used to run in the past had already frozen. With a crack, the bones were thrown on the ice. It was impossible to destroy the evidence of the crime of eating meat. However, she was the fish meat and she was the knife. Why should she be afraid? The law of the jungle was still applicable in Jianghu. Not to mention that Zhang Xiaohua, who had satisfied her craving for good food, was caressing her round belly while holding a small stick. She was leisurely licking her teeth and looking at the night sky that was still snowing heavily. She was secretly trying to figure out the essence of, suddenly looking back at it in the waning light. In the conference hall of the Misty School in the far north, Peng was gathering several brothers in the school to find the bones that had been thrown out. It was not snowing in the Misty Mountain Villa, but the clouds were still dense and the cold wind was whimpering. Although the door of the conference hall was blocked by a thick curtain, it was still difficult to prevent the cold from entering. However, at this time the atmosphere in the conference hall was unusually cold, making people feel that it was even colder than outside. At the front of the meeting hall, Grand Gang leader Peng was sitting in his usual position with a gloomy face. The flickering light cast a shadow across his face from time to time, making him look even more ferocious. Perhaps it was at this moment that the majesty of a superior was fully displayed. At this time, everyone in the conference hall was silent. No one dared to make a sound. After a long while, Peng coughed and asked gently, "Senior brother, how is Yen Er's body?" Big Boss, who usually looked very inconspicuous, also had a straight face as he said, "Yen Er's body is already weak. At night when she went out, she was drenched in the heavy rain and has already caught a cold. In addition, she was affected by the wind from the black-robed elder's palm and injured her internal organs. This illness and injury are quite serious. I heard from Hall Master Qin that she had already fainted on the way. After she woke up, she found a doctor along the way to treat her. After second brother rushed over, he also used his internal energy to treat Yen Er's injuries. After taking the medicine from the sect, she was already much better when she came back. Now, the doctor in the sect has already seen her, and we have also invited a doctor from Pingyang City to treat her. Now there is no major problem. After a short rest, she should be able to recover." Hearing that Yan's body had recovered, Peng's expression became slightly more restrained. He said to Big Boss, "Senior brother, I'm a little busy here during this period. Please pay more attention and take care of Yen Er's matters. Big Boss Hu nodded and said, Yen Er is our precious treasure. You can rest assured. Now that she is in our territory, I won't let her suffer the slightest grievance. Openg nodded and asked Hallmaster Lu Yuzhou of the Law Enforcement Hall, how's the investigation of the background of the black-robed men? Lu Yuzhou hesitated for a moment and said, after I received Sect Master's instructions, I immediately led my subordinates to investigate this matter personally. I know that eldest Miss and her group prioritize stability on their return journey. I'm afraid that it will take too long. Although the weather has turned cold, the corpses of the black-robed men will also rot. Therefore, I went ahead to receive eldest Miss in advance. I have personally checked the corpses of the black-robed men. I have also seen the features of their faces and bodies. I have also asked my subordinates to record them and prepare a record. However, among these people, the black-robed old man's face has been disfigured and I can't tell who he is. As for the others, they are all mediocre people. Although I have already drawn their faces and handed them to my disciples to secretly pay attention to them, it is not easy to find out the background of these people in the vast sea of people. Openg said angrily, find them. We must find them. Although it is difficult, it does not mean that it is impossible. As long as there is a trace of possibility, we must find out who is behind them. Lu Yuzhou hurriedly bowed and replied, I will follow Sect Master's instructions. Openg calmed his emotions and then asked, are there any other clues? Lu Yuzhou shook his head and said, these black-robed men's clothes and weapons are all extremely common items. They are very common in the Jianghu. I was unable to find any valuable clues. Moreover, they did not carry anything with them at all. Even the cleverest housewife cannot cook a meal without rice. I was unable to find anything useful. Openg snorted through his nose and said, don't tell me you have no clue at all. Lu Yuzhou said in a low voice, your subordinate is incompetent. For the time being, I was unable to find any other clues. Then he opened his mouth and looked like he wanted to say something but stopped. Openg could not help but frown and said, if you have anything to say, just say it. You now have a great responsibility. You must find out who is behind this. Our Misty School is not a side school that can be bullied by others. Lu Yuzhou hurriedly bowed and said, your subordinate has more or less understood the situation at that time from the subordinates of Huanxi Manor and the female disciples of Mingce Hall. However, I would like to know more about it. Hall Master Qin and Shernyo have been kept by Sect Master for the past few days. Your subordinate has not had the opportunity to find them. Do you think we should let them describe the situation at that time again today? It just so happens that all the elders are here. Openg nodded and said, that would be good. I have also heard some things and felt that there was something fishy. Today we will let them explain it properly, and all of you can give us some advice. Shernyo, tell us the specific situation from beginning to end. Shernyo rubbed his bald head and said, Sect Master, do you want to tell us everything? Openg glared at him and said, nonsense, tell us everything. Shernyo thought for a moment and then said, that day I drove the carriage, carrying Manor Lord O and Hall Master Qin out of Huanxi Manor's gate. Later, I felt refreshed and could not help but sing a little tune. At first they praised me, but as I sang they did not like it. However, Sect Master, the heavens have pity on me. I only know this song. If you want me to sing something else, I can't sing it. Everyone listened and looked at each other in dismay. What was this? Lu Qingyang almost spat out the wine in her mouth. Then, everyone could not help but cover their mouth and laugh. Openg also did not know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand and said, Shernyo, tell us the important things. Shernyo frowned and said, Sect Master, didn't you want me to tell you everything? Openg spat, you have to tell me everything. But you also have to tell me everything that happened before and after the Manor Lord was attacked. When you drove out, the men in black were still nowhere to be seen. What's there to say? Also, what does your singing have to do with the attack? Shernyo replied with grievance, how would I know what is related to the black-clothed men? Maybe they were jealous because I sang well? Maybe when I drove out, the black-clothed men knew. Openg rolled his eyes and nodded. That makes sense. Lu Yuzhou, do you understand? Openg nodded and said, that's right. Lu Yuzhou nodded and said, this subordinate understands. Shernyo asked in surprise. Hallmaster Lu, what do you understand? Why don't I understand? Openg waved his hand and said, it's none of your business. Just tell me. Shernyo asked patiently, then, do you still want to tell me everything? Openg thought for a moment and said, just tell me everything. Shernyo asked again, do you really want to tell me everything? Openg said angrily, just tell me. Don't talk so much nonsense. Even if you go to the toilet, you still have to tell me. Shernyo's face turned red. He hesitated and said, this need not be said. Openg gritted his teeth and was about to go berserk. Shernyo saw this and hurriedly told the truth. Although Shernyo was a careless and impetuous man, he talked about the things that happened along the way in detail. He spoke slowly and seemed to be very serious. When he said that every place along the way, there was a youth called Zhang Xiaohua who went out to find a place to practice martial arts. Openg couldn't help but frown. He looked suspiciously at Aunt Qin and said, this youth called Zhang Xiaohua, why does his name sound so familiar? Before Openg's voice fell, Lu Yuzhou immediately stood up and said anxiously, Hallmaster Qin, this youth goes out every day. Didn't you follow him? It's very likely that he's a mole for the black-clothed men. Where is this person now? I have to catch him and interrogate him. Shernyo, who was talking heartily, naturally didn't dare to say anything after being interrupted by Openg. But when he heard Lu Yuzhou shout, he immediately became angry and said angrily, how can you say that about Zhang Xiaohua? I can guarantee that Zhang Xiaohua is definitely not a mole for the black-clothed men. Lu Yuzhou said, as long as he's a mole, he'll naturally hide it very well. How could he let you know? Shernyo, you're more careless, so of course you wouldn't find out. Don't make a promise just because of personal feelings. At this time, a voice like an oriole's chirp sounded. Hallmaster Lu, I also have the same thoughts as Shernyo. I'm willing to use my life to guarantee that this Zhang Xiaohua is definitely not a mole. Lu Yuzhou didn't need to turn around to know that it was Aunt Qin who spoke. He frowned and said, Hallmaster Qin, now isn't the time to let your emotions affect your decisions. We're looking for clues and we have to be suspicious of any clues. It's better to mistakenly kill one than to let one go. However, Aunt Qin was a bit anxious and said in one breath, all right then. Have you ever heard of a spy who reaches the end of his career will kill his own people? Have you ever heard of a spy who reaches the end of his career will sacrifice his own life to save the person he wants to kill, regardless of whether he knows martial arts or not? Lu Yuzhou was stunned and said in puzzlement, Hallmaster Qin, you don't need to be so agitated. Speaking of Zhang Xiaohua, why are you talking so much? Shernyo interrupted him in a low, muffled voice and said, Zhang Xiaohua was the one who blocked in front of Manor Hedo and killed the black-clothed old man. Lu Yuzhou suddenly understood and stood up to apologize. Hallmaster Qin, please don't blame me. This one isn't clear about these things. Aunt Qin took a deep breath and said with a smile, don't blame me, don't blame me. Hallmaster Lu, this one is also a bit anxious. Actually, when Zhang Xiaohua went out to practice his fist techniques, I also sent people to check on him. He was indeed practicing some messy fist techniques. I think he was afraid of being laughed at. I also asked He Tianshu of the medicine hall about this. Openg heard this and also understood. He smiled and said, that's right. I also remember this name when Yen'er came back. She said that he saved her life. It seems that he was injured by the black-clothed man and fell into the water. I don't know if he's been found yet. Boss Hu continued, he hasn't been found yet. I've already sent people to contact related forces to help find him. Then, he hesitated for a moment and said, however, we've already searched a few dozen miles downstream. There's no sign of him alive or dead. It's been almost a month. There's probably no hope of finding him anymore. There's an 80 to 90% chance that he was killed on the spot by the black-clothed old man. His corpse has already sunk into the river to feed the fish and turtles. Openg nodded and said, no matter what, he saved Yen'er's life. We have to compensate him well. Boss Hu agreed and said, it's the new year now. The sect is busy. It's not easy to inform him of this kind of thing now. Moreover, he has an older brother who is an armed escort at the Lotus Escort Agency. He's currently on a long escort mission. We'll talk about it when he comes back. Openg nodded silently and then motioned for Stone Ox to continue. Stone Ox understood and glared fiercely at Lu Yuzhou. He continued with what he had just said and recounted everything that had happened along the way. After listening to Stone Ox, Boss Hu spoke first and said, "The previous robbery should be consistent with our initial speculation. It's to test our power. Hallmaster Qin is a famous figure in Jianghu. He must be clear about the details of his martial arts. Stone Ox is not famous in Jianghu, but he must be familiar with the gangs that are familiar with us or pay attention to us. The second competition and Stone Ox's competition on the rainy night are obviously two different situations. I guess they didn't expect He Tianshu from the pharmacy hall. Although this young man's martial arts are not the best, he's an obstacle for them. They can't firmly suppress us with their strength, so they didn't really make a move during the robbery." Openg continued Boss Hu's words and said, "So they hurriedly found this black-clothed old man with excellent martial arts and made a foolproof arrangement. They let people with similar martial arts to Hallmaster Qin stall Stone Ox and the others, and then let the black-clothed old man capture or kill Yenner. Haha, good plan, good strategy." Boss Hu also smiled and said, "However, they didn't expect that our disciples would see through the clues and send reinforcements to rescue them." Openg also smiled and said, "Yes, this disciple called Lan Dong is very good. He's smart and careful. He went back to the school with the team. Let him hand over some things and choose another disciple to go down. Let him stay in the school and focus on training. He should be of great use." Boss Hu said, "Yes, this time it's all thanks to Lan Dong. Without his news we would still be in the dark. Second brother and fifth brother wouldn't be able to arrive in time. It's only right to reward him." At this time Stone Ox opened his mouth and said, "Big gang leader, I think this time the one with the greatest martial arts should be Zhang Xiaohua. If he didn't kill the black-clothed old man, not only the manor lord would be in trouble, even if Lan Dong and the others arrived. I'm afraid." Hearing this, Openg nodded and said, "That's right. However, this person is already gone. It's useless to talk about martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua is also not a member of our Misty School. How do you want me to reward him? It's better to give more compensation." Stone Ox scratched his head and said, "Anyway, as long as Big Gang leader knows who has the most merit, I don't have any other opinions." Lu Yuzhou opened his mouth again and said, "Gang leader, from Stone Ox's description, I think it should be a gang that we're familiar with or a famous sect in Jianghu. We're familiar with their martial arts and manpower. Naturally, we can't use them. That's why we found people from other places who can't see the light of day to work for them. This is why we didn't have enough manpower during the night attack. Otherwise, with only Eldest Miss and the others, the black-clothed men wouldn't have used any tricks or strategies." Openg smiled and said, "Hallmaster Lu is right. Since you've explained it this way, you naturally have a plan. I'll leave the investigation to you. I hope you'll be able to find out the truth soon." Lu Yuzhou's face turned bitter and said, "Okay, I'll do my best." Then Openg looked at Stone Ox and Aunt Qin and said, "Hallmaster Qin, Stone Ox, you've worked hard before. However, you didn't analyze the situation on the way, and there were flaws in your plans. Tell me, how should you be punished?" Aunt Qin smiled bitterly and said, "Gang leader is right. I've been careless. If I'd paid more attention, I would have found something fishy long ago. We wouldn't have ended up in an irreversible situation. I'm willing to accept my punishment." Stone Ox scratched his head and said, "Big gang leader, I know I'm wrong and I'm willing to accept my punishment. However, you can punish me however you want, but please don't punish me by not drinking. The last time I went out with Eldest Miss, I didn't dare to drink. If you don't let me have my fill now, I'll suffocate." Everyone laughed, and only then did the atmosphere in the meeting hall become lively. Openg smiled and said, "The two of you have been following us the whole way. Even if you don't have merit, at least you've worked hard. However, our Misty School has always been fair in its rewards and punishments. We can't give you something to offset your merits. Go back to the disciplinary hall to receive your punishment." Aunt Qin and Stone Ox hurriedly bowed and said, "Understood, gang leader." Then Openg waved his hand and let Lu Yuzhou, Aunt Qin, and Stone Ox leave first. After they left, Openg said to Boss Hu, "Eldest senior brother, the year is passing by quickly. In the blink of an eye, it's the 15th of the first month. Everything needs to be planned." Chapter 133. Hu Lao laughed and said, "Yes, tomorrow after tomorrow, year after year. as if this day last year was yesterday, vivid in my mind. I'm getting old. Li Jian, who had been silent all this time, interrupted and said, "It's because we're old that there are young talents flocking to us." Peng said with a smile, "Second brother is right. Didn't we all go through the same thing when we were young? However, I don't believe that eldest senior brother is old. Now that eldest senior brother's inner strength is profound, he is also a famous expert in the Jianghu. Although he is old, his ambition is still 1,000 miles away. He still has a lot of potential." Lu Qingyang Lu Laowu shouted, "What's there to be afraid of? When you're old, you can just eat the longevity pill." Hearing this, Hu Laoda frowned and said solemnly, "Laowu, what did I say last year? Don't tell me you've forgotten?" Lu Laowu shrunk his neck and muttered, This, of course I haven't forgotten your teachings. I just said it casually." Hu Laoda looked around the hall and said, "I'll repeat it again today. My Misty School doesn't have any longevity pill. You've only heard about it. Remember?" Everyone replied, "Understood, eldest senior brother." Then Su Peihua Su Laowu asked, "Third brother, when will Laowu come back?" Peng said with a smile, "I just received news that Laowu and Shui Yuping have already made their move. They should be back tomorrow or 2 days later." Su Laowu said, "In the past, we 6 brothers used to spend the new year together. Now that there's the Luo Shui gang, we've left Laowu outside. I miss him a little." Peng said, "The Luo Shui gang situation has just stabilized. Naturally, there needs to be someone to oversee it. Shui Yuping's martial arts are good, but she's not good at scheming. Laowu can go over to help. Moreover, for the new year, the gang leader naturally has to be in the gang. Since I'm not going to Luo Shui, Shui Yuping will have to be there. Anyway, they'll be back soon." Hu Lao laughed and said, "Laowu is right. If you're the gang leader, you naturally have the responsibility of the gang leader. You have less time for yourself. However, third brother, even though it's still the new year, today's new year is very different from last year's." Peng and the others looked at Big Boss Hu with a smile, feeling proud in their hearts. Boss Hu continued, "In the short span of a year, our Misty School's strength has increased by quite a bit. Our brothers' martial arts have also become outstanding. Not to mention we have also joined forces with the Luo Shui gang, allowing our Misty School to develop both on land and on water. This is one good news after another." Old Fifth Lu suddenly interrupted, "Sesame blossoms and grows higher and higher." Everyone was stunned for a moment before they smiled and said, "Old Fifth's words are absolutely correct." Su Laolu was puzzled and asked, "Fifth brother, when did you learn to drop your bag?" Old Fifth Lu rolled his eyes and said, "If I don't read, I can't listen." So that was how it was. Everyone was delighted. When everyone finished laughing, Peng continued Hu Laoda's words and said, "This is all thanks to the secret plane. Therefore today, I asked you to stay behind to talk about the treasure hunt in the secret plane in a few days." Hearing this, Old Fifth Lu and Su Laolu did not speak. For this kind of discussion, they always only brought their ears and their mouths to drink. As for Li Jian, his face was still as calm as water. His eyes occasionally moved, but no one knew what he was thinking. Peng had already known about this situation. His words were directed at everyone, but his eyes were looking at Big Boss Hu. Big Boss Hu laughed and said, "Third brother, what are your thoughts? Let's listen first. Fourth brother is not here now. When he comes back, you can have a good discussion with him." Peng said, "In fact, it's very simple. Eldest senior brother, my opinion is the same as before. It's better for us to deal with the changes by sticking to the status quo. It's better for us to send an inconspicuous disciple." Big Boss Hu frowned and said, "During this period of time, the strength of our Misty School has greatly increased. The strength of our elite disciples has also greatly increased. It will definitely fall into the eyes of some discerning people. It's inevitable that they will pay more attention to some of our actions. If we only send a disciple, we have to consider the safety issue." Peng said with a smile, "It's precisely because people will pay attention to it that we should do this. If you and I go, won't we attract more attention? It's better to send more disciples out and set up some smokescreens so that they can't figure out what we're going to do. In fact, I think that the secret plane may be known by others sooner or later. We can only hide it for as long as we can. We can take advantage of this time to get as much benefits as possible." Big Boss Hu asked again, So this time we still let Yanming Jusher lead the operation? Oh Peng said with a wry smile, there's no other way. He has been there twice and is familiar with it. Moreover, he is the only one among the four forces that doesn't attract the attention of Jianghu people. If we don't let him go, who else can we send? Big Boss Hu laughed and said, Yanming Jusher is an honest and wonderful person with a good reputation. However, in front of the treasure, who won't be greedy? I hope he won't do anything stupid. Oh Peng said, we choose him because he is the weakest among the four forces. Before he does anything, he will think it over. Big Boss Hu said, in that case I have no objection. What about you? Big Boss Hu turned to look at the others. Lu Laowu and Su Laolu were sipping wine. When they heard the eldest senior brother's question, they had no time to swallow the wine and just nodded hurriedly. Li Lauer said in a low voice to show his agreement. Seeing this, Big Boss Hu said with a smile, we have no objection. You go ahead and do it first. When Laosi comes back, we can discuss the specific details. By the way, it's better not to disclose this matter to Shui Yupeng. After all, we may know a person's face but not his heart. It can make us completely relieved. Oh Peng said with a smile, don't worry, eldest senior brother. The fewer people who know a secret, the more confidential it is. Big Boss Hu said, well, this matter is settled. I'm relieved that you can do it. You can do it. The rest of the people also had the same look in their eyes and felt the same. Oh Peng was speechless. He rubbed his nose with his fingers and smiled bitterly. Let's not talk about how Oh Peng arranged the troops and arranged the disciples to release the smokescreen the next day. Let's talk about Zhang Xiaohua, who had been labeled as a glorious death. He had no idea that he had enjoyed the treatment of dying in the line of duty. He was just bored by the boring wait. It was snowing outside the cottage. It didn't stop until dawn. The sky also cleared up. The bright sunlight shone on the dozens of miles of frozen ground. Standing by the river, looking at the frozen jade belt and the snow-covered mountains, the golden sunlight hit one's face. The scene was extremely magnificent. If one appreciated such an artistic conception calmly, one might be able to comprehend something. Unfortunately, what the impatient Zhang Xiaohua wanted to see was not a static picture. What he wanted was a moving portrait of the people who came to find him. Unfortunately, in this desolate wilderness, whether there was snow or not, there were no signs of people. Now that the river was frozen, there were no boats. Zhang Xiaohua was annoyed. He picked up a stone and threw it at the layer of ice on the water. With a light kacha sound, the stone broke through the layer of ice and fell into the river. Then with a plop sound it disappeared without a trace. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that the layer of ice was not thick. He had wanted to jump on it to play, but now that he thought about it, his forehead was sweating. After a while of fear, Zhang Xiaohua could no longer keep his empty mind. He hurried back to the cottage. Using his fingers and toes to count, he realized that he had left the team for more than a month. Until now, no one had come to find him. Perhaps he was too optimistic. Zhang Xiaohua laughed at himself. The entire team's mission was to protect Oyan's safety. When they were attacked by the men in black, the first thing they thought about was how to protect Oyan. How could they spare more people to find him? Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua, who felt neglected, could not help but feel angry. They were all humans. They were all born of humans. Why couldn't they treat them equally? If they were born of demons, he would not be so calculative with them. Also, he stood up and saved the village head. Why did they give him some love and care? Why didn't they come to find him and let him feel the warmth of the mountain? This guy had wronged the people in the village. Why didn't he think about how far he had drifted? How could they find him? However, the kind Zhang Xiaohua immediately turned that trace of grief into worry for Oyan and Xiu Tong. She did not know if her two sisters would be able to escape safely. Perhaps it was because they were still in danger that they could not send people to find him? Look, he had already learned to find excuses for others. What a kind country boy. Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to wait here for nothing. Thinking about the days, it should be the new year now. The desire to sit around the stove with his family immediately turned into motivation to move forward. Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked back to the cottage. After tidying up a little, he prepared to get up. When it came to packing, all he had to do was find a handy walking stick. Zhang Xiaohua had drifted along with the crowd and had nothing on him except for the small sword in his hand. Now that he was leaving, all he had was a money pouch he had picked up. Of course, the most important thing in the money pouch was money. If not for the slippery ground after the snow, Zhang Xiaohua probably wouldn't have even bothered to pick up the walking stick. Zhang Xiaohua carefully closed the wooden door of the cottage. Looking around the place where she had lived for more than a month, she was reluctant to leave. Naturally, the kind-looking Shirtai and the cold, arrogant but pitiful Miss Xiaoming appeared in her mind. She did not know how they were doing now. In the vast sea of people, she did not know where they were. Perhaps she would never see them again in this life. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. Her left hand touched the little toy that already had an owner. She smiled bitterly and turned to walk out of the small yard. On the left side of the cottage, there was a small path along the river. Before it snowed, Zhang Xiaohua could still see it clearly. Now there was no trace of it. Zhang Xiaohua could not clear all the snow on the path. Therefore, she could only walk along the river and stagger. When Shirtai left, he had explained the way out very clearly. Zhang Xiaohua also remembered it clearly. Unfortunately, they had only told her the path without snow. After the snow, the world was white. There were no signs, no directions. Zhang Xiaohua regretted it. What should she do? Did she have to go back to the cottage and wait until the snow melted again? However, it was already winter. If she wanted to wait until the snow melted, wouldn't it be better to wait until spring came? Thinking of sitting alone in the cottage, Zhang Xiaohua felt a headache coming on. She immediately dismissed the idea of going back and continued walking along the river. The path did not always follow the river. When she reached a certain place, Zhang Xiaohua estimated and immediately turned in another direction. After walking for a while, she saw a forest. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. This was exactly what Shirtai had described. She must have gone the right way. Therefore, she identified the direction and plunged in. However, once she entered the forest, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but complain. The snow in the forest was not less than outside at all. There was also a lot of withered grass and dry branches. It was very inconvenient to walk. Even if there was no snow, it was still very difficult to walk. Was this the path that Shirtai had taken when he went out? Zhang Xiaohua had great doubts in her heart. In fact, Shirtai was right. Zhang Xiaohua's memory was even more correct. However, Shirtai seemed to have forgotten that she had always used lightness skill to walk this path. How could she walk step by step like Zhang Xiaohua? Shirtai had forgotten, and Zhang Xiaohua did not know either. As she walked, she secretly admired Shirtai. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. The younger generation could not compare with her in terms of hardships. This Shirtai walked such a difficult path every day. She left early and returned late. She was really a role model for her generation. But after walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua's heart no longer had longing and admiration. Anyone who walked for a long time in the vast snow forest would have feelings. Yesterday, Zhang Xiaohua had just tasted this feeling. In front of delicious food, she did not think. Today she tasted this difficult path again. It was inevitable that she would complain in her heart. How did Shirtai find such a hidden place? Could it be that she also floated over the river like herself? Moreover, the most terrible thing was that Zhang Xiaohua did not notice at all. Step by step, he slowly deviated from his original direction. When he finally walked out of the dense forest and looked up, he was surprised to find that in front of him was not the small hill that Shirtai had mentioned, but a flat field. Zhang Xiaohua was immediately dumbfounded. This obviously she was lost. However, this ending was not out of Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Zhang Xiaohua was very confident in her ability to have a poor sense of direction. It was almost impossible to not get lost after walking such a long path without clear markings. After a moment of silence, Zhang Xiaohua identified the direction and walked down firmly. Anyway, as long as she walked patiently, she would reach a village or town one day. It was hard to say whether Zhang Xiaohua was lucky or unlucky. In the other direction of the dense forest, which was the direction that Shirtai had pointed out, the hill was not much shorter than the mountain behind the cottage. Now it was covered with snow and it was very difficult to climb forward. Even if Zhang Xiaohua walked to the front of the hill correctly, it would be very difficult to climb over it. It was not as easy as Shirtai had said. After you climb over the hill, there will be a large fruit forest in front of you. Follow the path around the fruit forest and you will see the fairy. Obviously, when Shirtai said climb over, she must have used her lightness skill to climb over it. He wondered if she had thought about it that day when she held Xiao Meng's hand and floated past. With Zhang Xiaohua's ability, would it be easy for her to climb over? Zhang Xiaohua didn't seem to realize that he was walking on an easy path thanks to his poor sense of direction. Zhang Xiaohua took a few steps forward, taking one step at a time. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua's injuries were mostly healed, and his physical fitness was top-notch. He didn't feel tired even after walking for a long time. After walking for more than half a day, Zhang Xiaohua saw that the sun was setting in the west. She was anxious. Walking was not a problem, but it was dark. What should she do? She couldn't keep walking. She had to take a rest. Thinking of her habit of sleeping at midnight and looking around where there was no one, Zhang Xiaohua shuddered. So Zhang Xiaohua stopped. Facing the setting sun, she shaded her eyes with her hands and looked into the distance. It seemed that there was a faint mountain range over there. Maybe she could find a cave to stay in there. After making up her mind, Zhang Xiaohua put away her walking stick, took a deep breath and ran towards the mountain range. With the arrival of dusk, Zhang Xiaohua ran faster. Seeing the mountain range getting closer and closer, her heart became more and more at ease. When she ran closer, there was only a touch of sunset light left on the horizon. Even if Zhang Xiaohua's body was good, she was tired and panting at this time. The slope of the mountain range was gentle, so it was easy to climb. So while she could still see clearly, Zhang Xiaohua climbed while looking for a cave. But the mountain was getting higher and higher. Zhang Xiaohua's heart became colder and colder. The sky was about to turn dark, but she still couldn't find a place to stay. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua had climbed to a high place. Looking up, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. In the distance, there was a shadow of a dark area. It was obviously higher than the side. Zhang Xiaohua quickened his pace and walked closer. The stone in her heart finally fell. If it wasn't an abandoned house, then what was it? Zhang Xiaohua walked closer and took out a match. She lit it and saw that it was a dilapidated mountain temple. Half of the plaque in front of the door had fallen and was hanging there at an angle. She could vaguely see the big words on it, Mountain God Temple. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. How could there be such a temple in the wilderness? But it was also good. Today it helped Zhang Xiaohua. At least she wouldn't have to sleep in the wilderness. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua lit a match and looked around the Mountain God Temple briefly. Then, he picked up some dried branches around the temple and started a raging bonfire in the temple's hall. After a tiring day, Zhang Xiaohua leaned against the warm fire and ate some dry rations that she brought with her. She immediately felt refreshed. Then Zhang Xiaohua gathered her thoughts and got into a fighting stance. In this spacious Mountain God Temple, she practiced the Fist of the North Star 9 times. When the cool energy flowed through her body, Zhang Xiaohua stretched her arms and legs comfortably. These days were really comfortable. Of course, after recuperating from his injuries, Zhang Xiaohua practiced Elder Yu's swordsmanship to the best of his ability. After which, he found some straw at the back of the temple and laid it down beside the bonfire before falling asleep comfortably. Please add it to your collection, thank you. Chapter 134. The night was boundless and a half-moon hung in the sky. The white snow reflected a weak white light. In the quiet wilderness, a black dot like a bullet suddenly appeared in the distance and quickly shot towards the snow-covered mountains. That black dot from time to time swept past the branches that stretched into the night sky and stepped on the thick snow without touching the ground. The branches swayed slightly, but the snow did not fall. The snow that was stepped on only left a slight trace. Obviously, this was a very high level of Qinggong. It turned out that this was a night walker dressed in black. The black-clothed man's speed was very fast. Not long after, he had reached the bottom of the mountain. The black-clothed man stopped at the bottom of the mountain and then shot up the mountain. His speed was not much slower than when he was on the plains. Not long after, he came to a flat place. He looked around and ran towards a dark place. When he got close, the dark thing showed its outline. Wasn't it the mountain temple where Zhang Xiaohua stayed at night? At this time, the black-clothed man suddenly stopped. He took out something from his arms and slowly walked to the door. He stuck his head out and stared at Zhang Xiaohua, who was sleeping next to a bonfire that was about to extinguish. After listening for a while, he walked in with heavy footsteps. When he entered the temple, under the weak light of the fire, the black dagger in the black-clothed man's hand emitted a cold aura. The black-clothed man saw the young boy lying next to the bonfire and was slightly relieved, but his hand was still holding the dagger. He walked a few steps into the temple and picked up a small stone from the ground. He threw it at Zhang Xiaohua. The stone hit Zhang Xiaohua's hand. It was very light. Zhang Xiaohua was sleeping soundly at this time. How could he feel it? However, it was precisely his lack of feeling and reaction that made the black-clothed man very surprised. He carefully stepped forward and tried to kick Zhang Xiaohua, but he still did not move like a dead pig. The black-clothed man heaved a sigh of relief. It turned out that this person was already dead. The black-clothed man used his finger to test Zhang Xiaohua's nose. Hey, why is he still breathing? The black-clothed man was puzzled. Then he pushed Zhang Xiaohua with all his strength. But Zhang Xiaohua did not seem to feel anything. He turned over and went back to sleep. When the person saw this, he ignored Zhang Xiaohua and casually picked up a few withered branches from the side and added them to the almost extinguished bonfire. The flames immediately circled around the branches and burned rapidly. The entire temple immediately lit up and warmed up. Not long after, the black-clothed man's eyes looking at the flame suddenly glanced up. He seemed to have noticed something and then stared at the temple door. Sure enough, a black shadow rushed in from outside, bringing in a gust of cold wind. The bonfire swayed left and right. When that person stood still, it was a short and thin night walker. He also had a black cloth wrapped around his head, so people could not see his face clearly. The person who came later looked around the temple and saw Zhang Xiaohua beside the bonfire. He frowned and said, "Mei Lao, who is this boy?" The black-clothed man called Mei Lao Yao smiled and said, "I don't know. When I got here, this boy was already sleeping here." The black-clothed man who came later said, "Then why don't you go to another place?" Mei Lao Yao said unhappily, "Do you think it's easy to find a hidden place? I tried just now. This boy is asleep. I can't do anything. He doesn't have any internal energy. He's probably a country boy who got lost. Shopkeeper Lu, you're too careful." When Shopkeeper Lu heard this, he walked forward and said, "It's better to be safe than sorry. If I wasn't careful, how could I live until now?" Shopkeeper Lu walked to Zhang Xiaohua and also looked at him. He kicked him twice. Just as Mei Lao Yao said, there was no reaction. However, he was still worried. He used his internal energy and pressed a few acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. He said, "Let him sleep. If I don't hit his sleeping acupoint, I won't feel at ease." Mei Lao Yao was still warming himself by the fire. He said, "Okay, you're finally relieved. Come and warm yourself." Shopkeeper Lu sat beside the bonfire and asked, "Mei Lao, how did you find this place? I've been in Misty Rain Town for so long. How come I've never heard of a mountain god temple here?" Mei Lao Yao said unhappily, "Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I came to Misty Rain Town for a mission 2 years ago, and was discovered by my enemies. When I chased all the way here, I found it on the mountain. When I looked for you this time, I suddenly thought that such a secluded place would be the best place to see you." Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "That's right. A place that even I don't know of is naturally very appropriate. However, on such a snowy night, only someone as good as you won't leave too many traces on the snow. I can't do that. It's hard to guarantee that I won't be seen." Mei Lao Yao sneered and said, "So what if someone sees us tomorrow? Can he know what we talked about tonight? Can he find your shop?" Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "You're right, little brother. I'm being overly cautious." Mei Lao Yao said, "There's no right or wrong. Once you enter the Jianghu, you can't help yourself. There's a bloody disaster at any time. It's normal to be careful. Oh, okay, let's cut the small talk. What's wrong with the Tan family?" Shopkeeper Lu immediately stopped smiling and said, "The Tan family is managed like a family. I've sent spies to infiltrate them several times, but they all failed. In order not to alert the enemy, I didn't dare to try again. Now, as a jade shopkeeper, I have some connections with their third young master." Mei Lao Yao didn't say anything. Seeing this, Shopkeeper Lu didn't know whether the other was happy or sad. He said with a smile, I know this is far from the requirements of the organization, but I do have some difficulties. You see, I've made friends with some low-level disciples. They can't get close to the core of the Tan family, and they can't find out anything useful. As for the core disciples, not to mention their eldest young master and second young master, who are all outstanding talents and extremely shrewd, even disciples like Tan Wen and Tan Wu, who are slightly from the side branches, have received strict training since they were young. They are strict with themselves in all aspects. It's very difficult to cater to their preferences. Mei Laoyao frowned and said, This is the truth. The organization also knows this. Didn't they let you come here because they liked your specialty? That's why they gave you this tough nut to crack? You have to display the spirit of not being afraid of hardship and not being tired. Bring out the spirit you used to be good at fighting battles. Strive to put a Kongming lantern in this difficult place. Shopkeeper Lu was stunned and said, This? Brother Mei, what is a Kongming lantern? Mei Laoyao smiled and said, Brother Lu, you're just a country bumpkin. A Kongming lantern is a lantern that can be placed in the sky. It's like you've made achievements that people look up to. Shopkeeper Lu cupped his hands and said, I'm impressed. Brother Mei, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. After your training at the headquarters, your level has improved greatly. Mei Laoyao was also happy. He cupped his hands in a certain direction and said, This is all a gift from the master. You and I must be grateful. If you do well this time, you might be able to receive the master's appreciation. When Shopkeeper Lu heard this, he hurried forward and took out an item from his bosom. He carefully placed it in front of Mei Laoyao and said with a smile, Brother Mei, this is an ancient jade that I received when I was in the countryside last time. It's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It's very unique. Please accept it and admire it when you're free. Mei Laoyao looked at the item that Shopkeeper Lu handed over and accepted it carelessly. He said with a smile, Brother Lu, you're so kind. I only have this little hobby, yet you've taken it seriously. Just based on this, it's impossible for me not to improve. Shopkeeper Lu said modestly, My insignificant skills are nothing. Compared to Brother Mei, it's like a firefly compared to the bright moon. I hope you'll put in more good words for me in the future. Mei Laoyao rubbed the item in his hand and said with a smile, The master is a master who can't tolerate sand in his eyes. Naturally, he will reward those who make a contribution and punish those who make a mistake. If Brother Lu can have some achievements, I'll also be able to benefit from it. Shopkeeper Lu said, Isn't that still dependent on the master's guidance and brother's support? Mei Laoyao smiled and didn't say anything else. He just played with the ancient jade in his hand. Shopkeeper Lu saw that his goal had been achieved and said, However, I heard third young Master Tan talk about some things in the past few days. There are actually some clues. Mei Laoyao made a sound of surprise and said, Tell me about it. Perhaps you've made some new discoveries. Shopkeeper Lu said, According to third young Master Tan, the Tan family sent out many disciples before and after the new year. It seemed like there were many missions. Third young Master Tan was a bit puzzled. Although the family usually had some affairs outside, they were all scattered at different times. He hadn't seen any disciples go out at the end of the year. He was very puzzled. Mei Laoyao said, Then did you ask him what kind of missions they were? Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, How would I dare to ask such a sensitive question? However, listening to his vague meaning, he also didn't know. Moreover, when he asked the family head, he was reprimanded. If he hadn't been reprimanded, he wouldn't necessarily have told me. Mei Laoyao asked again, If third young Master Tan didn't know, then what about eldest young Master Tan and second young Master Tan? Did they make any movements? Did they also go out on missions? Shopkeeper Lu shook his head and said, No, they're all staying at the Tan family's old residence. Mei Laoyao frowned and said, That's a bit strange. If something really happened, the eldest and second in the family would definitely go out to take care of the overall situation. They're all staying at home. Presumably, the Tan family suddenly encountered some trivial matters. You should carefully investigate and see if you can find anything. Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, Brother Mei is wise. Mei Laoyao smiled and said, Brother Lu, there's no need to be like this. Back then we were all brothers who slept on the same kong. Although our positions are different now and we each have our own division of labor, this is still the need of work. You and I are both stones in the organization. We move wherever we need to. There's no need to be so polite in private. Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, I wouldn't dare. I can't even run faster than you can walk. I'd better listen to you honestly. Mei Laoyao smiled and didn't insist. After a while, Shopkeeper Lu seemed to have thought of something and said, That's right, Brother Mei. There seems to be one more thing. I don't know if it's useful. Mei Laoyao smiled and said, There's no harm in saying it. I'll also give you a reference. Shopkeeper Lu said, Some time ago, Third Young Master Tan vaguely said that his two older brothers used to often practice martial arts with him. In the past year they didn't practice martial arts together with Third Young Master Tan. Moreover, they never sparred with Third Young Master Tan. Sometimes when he was itching to spar with his two older brothers, they would use all kinds of excuses to refuse. He was very puzzled. Later, he seemed to eavesdrop on a disciple of an unorthodox school saying that his two older brothers' martial arts had improved greatly, and were already among the best of the Tan family's younger generation. Speaking up to this point, Shopkeeper Lu stole a glance at Mei Laoyao and said, however, Third Young Master Tan scoffed at this, saying, The three of them are the direct descendants of the Tan family. Their martial arts have been passed down in the family since they were young. It's normal for them to be among the best. Brother Mei, do you think this information is useful? Mei Laoyao said, Brother Lu, this information is very important. I'll definitely tell this information to His Majesty personally. You should properly record this merit. Shopkeeper Lu said happily, Then many thanks, Brother Mei. However, he immediately felt somewhat puzzled and asked, Brother Mei, please understand the Meis. This humble one doesn't feel anything unusual about this information. Mei Laoyao said with a smile, Brother Lu, this is the difference between the central and local governments. The asymmetry of information naturally means that the estimation of information is different. I'll tell you the truth. Do you know why you were specially transferred to this Tan family village from another place last year? Shopkeeper Lu shook his head blankly. Mei Laoyao said in a low voice, His Majesty has an old friend who isn't very close to him. In the past he had quite a bit of conflict with Tan Yefeng. However, that Tan Yefeng's martial arts were quite different from his. So Tan Yefeng had always endured and didn't make a move. Who knew that at the beginning of last year, His Majesty received news that Tan Yefeng had fought his old friend and was actually killed by Tan Yefeng under Shadowless feet. His Majesty was very astonished. How did Tan Yefeng's martial arts improve so much? That's why this brother found an opportunity to transfer Brother Lu here. Shopkeeper Lu suddenly understood. Mei Laoyao continued in a low voice, This matter belongs to the level of confidentiality. This humble one was also afraid that Brother Lu wouldn't understand and lose useful information for no reason. That's why this humble one told you the truth. I hope that Brother Lu can keep this a secret and pay more attention to this in the future. If you get credit, won't this humble one also be able to recommend you for merit? Shopkeeper Lu hurriedly bowed and said, I understand, Brother Mei. Now that I have a general direction, I won't fish in troubled waters. I believe that with Third Young Master Tan as a breakthrough point, I definitely won't disappoint His Majesty's expectations and Brother Mei's recommendation. Mei Laoyao also nodded. The two of them talked a little more. When the sky was a little brighter, they went down the mountain separately. The two of them were discussing such confidential matters in a temple in the wilderness, but they only hit Zhang Xiaohua's sleeping acupoint and treated him as a dead object. They didn't avoid him at all. Moreover, when they left, they didn't do the shady business of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. They just patted their butts and left. In fact, that wasn't the case. The man in black who came first, Mei Laoyao, didn't intend to let Zhang Xiaohua live until the morning. Therefore, he didn't look at Zhang Xiaohua's face at all. He was just a little boy who was lost. When he left, he casually hit his dead acupoint. How could he have a chance to live? However, the man in black who came later, Shopkeeper Lu, was cautious. He hit Zhang Xiaohua's sleeping acupoint first. He knew Shopkeeper Lu's strength. It wouldn't dissolve by itself without 24 hours. The bonfire in the temple had been extinguished when the two of them were talking. They didn't add any dead branches. Who could survive a day in this winter when a drop of water would turn into ice? In the minds of Mei Laoyao and shopkeeper Lu, no matter why this child came to this mountain temple, it was his bad luck. They were virtuous not to hit his dead acupoint. There was no reason for him to go out alive. He would definitely be frozen to death. Before Mei Laoyao left, he also wanted to give him a kick. Unfortunately, shopkeeper Lu let him go first. How could he have the nerve to doubt shopkeeper Lu's way of handling things in front of him? He could only go out first and act like a leader who trusted shopkeeper Lu. In their eyes, killing people to silence them was as easy as slapping their hands to kill a fly. They didn't take it to heart. However, they didn't think about it. A young man was lost in a barren mountain. It wasn't easy for him to find a place to sleep. He was sleeping soundly. What did that have to do with them? How could they just hit his sleeping acupoint and freeze him to death? If that was the case, it would be better for him to die at that time. He would have to suffer such torture before his death. Unfortunately, heaven helps the worthy. After the two people left for a long time, the sky gradually brightened. A ray of sunlight flashed across the mountain temple. Zhang Xiaohua, whose sleeping acupoint had been hit, suddenly opened her eyes. As usual, a ball of light flashed in her eyes. She stretched her body and sat up. She looked around and saw the ashes of the bonfire that had lost its heat. Only then did she remember what happened last night. She stretched herself and secretly rejoiced. If she didn't have this temple, she didn't know how to get through the long night. After wiping her face with the snow outside, Zhang Xiaohua pulled herself together and started practicing her fist and sword techniques. She only stopped when her body was completely comfortable. She ate some dry rations and prepared to go down the mountain to find a town. But when she left the mountain temple and looked at the snowy mountains, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. The Shirtai was really harmful. What kind of secluded place was this? She had walked for an entire day before arriving at this mountain range. How should she proceed from here? Just as she was hesitating and cursing in frustration, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes suddenly lit up. She could see a few rows of footprints in front of the steps of the mountain temple. Those small footprints were naturally Zhang Xiaohua's own. There were also a few rows of larger footprints beside them. Needless to say, they were definitely left behind by others who came to the mountain temple. Zhang Xiaohua was excited. When she came here yesterday, it was already dark, so she naturally didn't see them. Now that it was daybreak, they pointed her in the right direction. This mountain temple was really efficacious. No wonder there were still people coming here even though it was so remote. However, there didn't seem to be any idols in the mountain temple. But why would Zhang Xiaohua care if there were idols or not? After thanking this inexplicable god in her heart, Zhang Xiaohua packed up and prepared to follow the footprints to find a town. At the very least, she should be able to find a place with signs of human habitation. Please add it to your collection, thank you. Chapter 135. Zhang Xiaohua followed the footprints in front of the mountain god temple and went down the mountain. However, he soon found that the footprints were strange. The footprints seemed to belong to two people. One of them stepped deeper, and the other stepped shallower. However, they had one thing in common, which was that the footprints were very big. One step was enough for Zhang Xiaohua to walk several steps. Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised. How long were these people's legs? Moreover, when going down the mountain, people walked on steep roads, but Zhang Xiaohua couldn't. He had to find a gentle slope and look for the footprints at the bottom of the mountain. After walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua understood everything. There was a small forest in front of him. When he walked to the forest, the footprints disappeared and reappeared on the other side of the forest. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua, who was half a step into Jianghu, seemed to know that the footprints he followed were left by a martial arts master. But why did these masters go to the mountain god temple? Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to know. He just wanted to let the footprints take him back to the human world. After walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua encountered another problem. The footprints were divided into two lines, and they went in different directions. For this kind of problem, Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate and easily chose the right answer. Why? Thinking with Zhang Xiaohua's heel, he knew that if he followed the footprints that were deeper, then the footprints that were shallower must be good at lightness skill. The snow was vast. If the master was excited and stepped on the snow without leaving any trace, wouldn't Zhang Xiaohua follow him in vain? Since he chose the direction, Zhang Xiaohua followed the footprints of the martial arts master he had never met. He faced the rising sun and walked forward proudly. These footprints were worthy of Zhang Xiaohua. Although the depth of the footprints differed from time to time, Zhang Xiaohua could still distinguish them. Along the way, the footprints didn't seem to be any different, which made Zhang Xiaohua feel very grateful. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't stop praising this God-given good man. Now shopkeeper Liu, who had already returned to the shop and wanted to freeze Zhang Xiaohua to death, kept sneezing. He couldn't stop cursing Zhang Xiaohua in his heart. What a lucky bastard. He actually found such a remote place to meet. Now he had caught a cold and had to spend money to see a doctor. It was almost noon. Zhang Xiaohua was a little hungry. When she came out, she only took some dry food. She had planned to eat halfway. Now she didn't know where she was. She had eaten the rest in the morning. If she didn't find anyone today, she would be hungry at night. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was letting his imagination run wild, he suddenly saw smoke on the horizon. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He immediately turned around and ran towards the smoke. He didn't care about following in the footsteps of that arrogant man. The most direct result was that shopkeeper Liu, who just took the money and went out, suddenly stopped sneezing. He touched his nose, shook his head, and said to himself, "Heaven helps the good. Last night I didn't kill the country boy in the wild temple. I just sealed his sleeping acupoint and let him freeze to death. In comparison, I have accumulated good karma. I immediately received interest and didn't need to spend money to see a doctor. It seems that I have to learn from the senior management of the organization. They are real masters who kill people without spilling blood." Zhang Xiaohua left the footprints and turned to the place where there was smoke again. She opened a road when she met a mountain and built a bridge when she crossed a river. She carried out the fearless Jianghu spirit. Finally, in the afternoon, she came to a small town in the countryside. Looking at the small town in the distance, the houses around the town, and the poultry around the houses, Zhang Xiaohua sighed with emotion. She finally found human habitation. She didn't have to worry about being hungry anymore. Zhang Xiaohua walked along the small path of the small town. It was a typical rural town, a little smaller than Lu Town. Now that it was the new year, there were many people on the street. They were all wearing new clothes and smiling. When they met, they were all friendly and cupped their hands to each other. Many young boys about the same age as Zhang Xiaohua were holding incense and setting off firecrackers happily. It was a scene of celebrating the new year. Zhang Xiaohua's dress was not shabby, but it was not neat either. It didn't look like she was celebrating the new year. The people in the town saw it and felt a little strange. After all, ordinary people, no matter how poor they were, had to change their children's clothes for the new year. People like Zhang Xiaohua who didn't have new clothes to wear were very rare. Moreover, they looked unfamiliar, so they must be an orphan in the countryside. How could Zhang Xiaohua care about other people's faces? He looked for a place where he could buy food. However, after searching for a while, he suddenly realized that it was the new year. Ordinary small shops were closed and not open for business. Where could he buy food? Zhang Xiaohua secretly touched the money bag in his arms. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Since he was born, he had never taken so much money. He even had to starve. It was really unfair. Looking at the shops in the small town that were basically closed, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but smile bitterly. Did he have to wait until the 6th day of the new year to buy food? He doubted whether he could survive until then. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. It was impossible. He could only find someone and knock on the door to buy food. At this time, a young man in his 20s walked in front of him. He was dressed very brightly, had greasy hair and a powdered face. He seemed to be humming a little song. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly went forward and cupped his hands in greeting. "Excuse me, big brother." That person was squinting his eyes and reminiscing about something. He was very impatient when he was interrupted. Seeing the poor country child in front of him, he frowned and secretly cursed his bad luck. Was this person asking for money on the street? It was the new year. If he gave it, he would be distressed. If he didn't give it, he wouldn't get any good luck. He was in a dilemma. Thus he asked, "What's the matter?" As he spoke, his hand reached into his bosom and secretly took out a copper coin. If it was money, he would use it to send the matter away. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Excuse me, big brother, what time is it now?" That person was stunned. So it wasn't money. His heart relaxed and he said with a smile, "It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon." After he finished speaking, he was about to walk away. Zhang Xiaohua said again, "Sorry, big brother, you misunderstood. I asked what day is it today?" That person was even more stunned. He looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua and asked, "Little brother, do you have a fever? You don't know what day it is?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I mistakenly entered the deep mountains. When I came out, it was already late. What year is it now?" That person saw that Zhang Xiaohua's words were extraordinary and immediately showed respect. He said solemnly, "Today is the 6th day of the 1st month in the 23rd year of Jin Feng. I wonder when little brother entered the mountains?" Zhang Xiaohua cupped her hands and said seriously, "It's about the beginning of the 12th month in the 22nd year of Jin Feng." That person smiled and said, "Admirable, admirable. What a great immortal fate." Immediately, the smile on his face froze. Where did this come from? It's only 1 month. Are you kidding me? Zhang Xiaohua laughed in her heart and asked again, "Big brother, may I ask where I can buy food in this town? Anything is fine as long as it can fill my stomach." That person was just about to speak when he suddenly rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "Which shop is open during the new year? However, little brother's request is not high. As long as you can fill your stomach, there is a place you can go." Zhang Xiaohua said happily, "Please enlighten me, big brother." That person pointed to the distance and said, "Go forward from here until you reach the end of the road. Turn left and walk straight until you reach a sundry goods store. Turn right and walk straight. At the end of the road is a Food as Heaven restaurant. It might be open at this time. If it's not open, I'm afraid little brother will have to go hungry." After saying that, Zhang Xiaohua thanked him again and again. Only then did she follow the path that the person pointed out and quickly ran. The young man behind her curled his lips and laughed sinisterly. He walked away by himself. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the Food as Heaven, along the designated path, she could not help but be stunned. It was not that the Food as Heaven restaurant was not open. It was just that the entrance of the Food as Heaven restaurant was filled with people, and it was extremely noisy. It turned out that this Food as Heaven was the most prosperous restaurant in the small town. The new year was the best time for restaurants. How could they not open their doors to welcome customers? However, Zhang Xiaohua was in a dilemma. Not to mention that Zhang Xiaohua had never had the experience of going to a restaurant since she was young. On the way to Pingyang City, she had eaten at the Galloping Horse Inn. That was even when she followed Zhang Xiaohu there. Moreover, the customers of this restaurant either came in carriages or were dressed in silk and satin. All of them were fat and big. It seemed that this restaurant was not of a low class. Now could she even enter? Just as she was hesitating, Zhang Xiaohua's stomach rumbled. Helplessly, Zhang Xiaohua still braced herself and walked forward. The waiter in front of the Food as Heaven restaurant was sweating profusely at the entrance to welcome customers. Suddenly, he saw a young man from the countryside walking over hesitantly. He could not help but frown secretly and thought to himself, "Country bumpkin, don't you know where you are before coming here without permission?" Just as he was about to wait for Zhang Xiaohua to go forward and scold him, the waiter realized that although Zhang Xiaohua's clothes were old, they were not made of the commonly seen cloth in the countryside. The waiter's eyes were very sharp. He took a closer look and saw that the clothes were tailored to fit. They were probably not picked up or stolen. Although they were not new clothes, he could not figure out her identity. Therefore, he quickly changed his attitude and smiled. "Young man, why are you here at Food as Heaven?" Looking at the waiter's attitude, Zhang Xiaohua secretly thought that the waiter of this big restaurant was indeed different. He was very professional and did not lower the standard of service just because of her young age. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Of course I'm here to eat. What else can I be here for?" The waiter blushed. That was true. He thought that the restaurant was high-end and this young man did not have money to eat here. Perhaps he was here to look for someone or ask about something. He did not expect that the young man was here to eat. One could not judge a book by its cover. The sea could not be measured with a pint pot. This ordinary-looking young man was actually a rich person. Therefore, the waiter quickly bowed, waved his hand, and gestured for Zhang Xiaohua to come in. When Zhang Xiaohua entered the restaurant, it was an eye-opener. It was already past lunchtime, but the restaurant was still noisy and there were almost no empty seats. Zhang Xiaohua did not know what to do when the waiter smiled and said, "Dear customer, do you want to have a quiet private room on the second floor?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she thought to herself, forget it. Who knows if there is a private room fee or a minimum price here? Although I have never eaten in a restaurant, the ancients said that even if I have not eaten pork, I have seen pigs run. There are many books about sharpening one's knife. I will not be taken advantage of for no reason. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua quickly waved her hand and said, "This place is good. It's so lively." The waiter did not force her. He found a small table on the first floor and let Zhang Xiaohua sit. Then he poured tea for Zhang Xiaohua and brought the menu for Zhang Xiaohua to order. The menu was filled with the names of the dishes. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand them, but he could understand the prices. He flipped through them one by one. In the end, he secretly curled his lips. Why are they so expensive? He did not know what they were, but he could not bear to part with the money. When the waiter saw that he did not order after flipping through the menu, he thought that there was nothing he liked. So he smiled and said, "If dear customer is not satisfied, this small restaurant has a secret recipe. I will give you a few dishes to see if you are satisfied." The waiter swallowed his saliva and recited the names of several dishes in one breath. His voice was high and low, and it was very pleasant to hear. Zhang Xiaohua was very surprised when he heard it. This restaurant was different from others. Just reciting the names of the dishes was like singing. However, when he casually asked about the price of a dish, he immediately withered. It was actually much more expensive than the menu. Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and asked, "Waiter, how much is the white rice in your restaurant?" The waiter was stunned and said casually, "White rice is free." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was very happy. She clapped her hands and said, "Good, that's it. Give me 5 big bowls of white rice." The waiter trembled and almost dropped the menu in his hand. He glared fiercely at Zhang Xiaohua. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in public and he was afraid that it would affect the restaurant's business, the waiter only wanted to step over and grab Zhang Xiaohua's neck and throw him out. Wasn't this just making fun of him? Looking at the waiter's angry eyes, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She smiled innocently and asked, "Waiter, what are you doing here? Hurry up and get to work. Give me the white rice." The waiter gritted his teeth and said with a smile, "Dear customer, this white rice is free, but you should at least order a dish." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, "You didn't say that just now?" The waiter lowered his head and said, "That was this little one's negligence. Please forgive me." Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Must I order a dish?" The waiter said, "Yes." Zhang Xiaohua asked again, "Are you sure? Must I order a dish?" The waiter said with certainty, "Yes, I'm sure, definitely and definitely." Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, I only knew that I had to order a dish after you said it. If you didn't say it, how would I know that I had to order a dish? Since you said it, then I can only order a dish. Alright, I'll order this." Zhang Xiaohua pointed at the cheapest dish on the menu, Mala chicken offal. The waiter looked and asked, "Dear customer, are you sure?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I'm sure, definitely and definitely." The waiter said, "Then dear customer, you won't go back on your word?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "I won't. This one has always been a man of his word. As the saying goes, a gentleman's word is as fast as a horse's whip. If I say this, then I will." The waiter nodded and said, "Then dear customer, you won't add any other dishes?" Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "There's no need. However, I still want those 5 big bowls of white rice." Thus, the waiter put away the menu and said, "Please wait a moment." Only then did he stagger away with a heart full of resentment. After the waiter left, Zhang Xiaohua poured a cup of water and gulped it down in one gulp. However, she still wasn't satisfied and drank 3 cups in a row. Only then did she slow down a little and thought, the tea in this restaurant is also ordinary. It's a far cry from the mountain spring water at home. However, this tea doesn't seem to cost money. I can drink more. After thinking, she was about to pour a 4th cup, but the teapot was empty. Zhang Xiaohua called out, "Waiter, can you add some more tea?" The waiter had just walked back and handed the menu to the chef when he was called over. He was still puzzled. He remembered that he had just poured a pot of tea for this youth. Could it be that he remembered wrongly? After waiting for the waiter to pour more tea, Zhang Xiaohua poured a full cup and drank it. She raised her head and looked around, sizing up the restaurant. At this time it was already past meal time. Most of the customers in the restaurant were drinking and chatting. On the left side of Zhang Xiaohua was a table of 5 burly men. They were dressed in martial arts attire and were drinking and chatting. Perhaps because they were sitting close to each other, those men's voices were also loud. Zhang Xiaohua didn't intend to listen to their conversation. However, those words still didn't reach her ears. She only heard one person say, "His granny, it's the new year. How can we be sent to such a poor place? It's really not a day for humans." Another person said, "That's right. In the past we used to spend the new year with our wives and children. How can we have such a long escort this year?" One person said, "There's no other way. The customers are in a hurry. Time is tight, so we can only run during the new year." Another person said, however, "The remuneration this time is quite good. It's double the usual." One person said, "Then you're an old hat. The government has a rule that the remuneration for work during the holidays is 3 times the usual. What's with this?" Another person said, "Really? How come I didn't know about this? This won't do. I have to go back and talk to Chief Zhang. No matter what, we can't lose out." One person said, "Forget it. Chief Zhang is also a newcomer. Although he has gained some prestige recently, he's still not a proper escort. It's better to ask around in private first." Another person said, "Then we have to tell him so that he can be prepared. Maybe he doesn't even know about it." One person said, "That's fine too. Chief Zhang is usually very straightforward and enthusiastic. Maybe we can talk to the higher-ups and get some compensation." Another voice said, "Let's talk about these things when we get back. Aren't we just here to drink? We should just wait for the job to be done quickly so that we can go home. In this town, only this restaurant is worthy of our attention. Even if we want to find a place to drink and drink, there's no such place." One person said, "There is, but it's a pity that we're not worthy of our attention. Besides, it's the new year and people have to go home too. How many of them are still waiting for you to take care of them in the courtyard?" Following that, the few of them talked about some men's topics in a vulgar manner. Zhang Xiaohua was already at the age where she didn't really understand. Her face and ears turned red as she listened, but she couldn't cover her ears. She could only keep drinking water to distract herself. Accidentally, the teapot was empty again. Zhang Xiaohua could only call out again, "Waiter, add more water. Please add it to your collection, thank you." Chapter 136. When the waiter served Zhang Xiaohua spicy chicken giblets and 5 bowls of white rice on a tray, Zhang Xiaohua had already drunk 3 pots of tea, and her stomach was rumbling with hunger. But when Zhang Xiaohua saw the plate full of chili and red chicken giblets, she couldn't help but be dumbfounded. She asked blankly, "Waiter, is this the dish I ordered?" The waiter smiled and said, "Sir, that's right. This is our restaurant's famous special dish, spicy chicken offal. It's spicy and spicy. Tastes very delicious. It's a dish that people who like chili will definitely order." Zhang Xiaohua's face turned bitter. That's right. The menu clearly said spicy and spicy. Why didn't she ask more? The waiter asked her several times. Why didn't she pay attention? Alas, she was blindly greedy. Perhaps this dish was indeed delicious, but she never ate spicy food. There was no other way. She couldn't ask the waiter to change it to other dishes. Wouldn't that cost more money? Zhang Xiaohua had to bite the bullet. She picked up the bowl and chopsticks and carefully put a piece of chicken giblets into her mouth. Immediately, a spicy taste spread from her mouth to her head and then to her eyes. It was so spicy that she almost cried. Zhang Xiaohua quickly ate a few mouthfuls of white rice to calm down a little. Then Zhang Xiaohua drank a lot of tea. Only then did she have the courage to eat a mouthful. Although this spicy chicken giblets was extremely spicy, it was also a good dish to eat. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to stop but was afraid of wasting, and wanted to eat but was afraid of spicy food. When the plate of spicy chicken giblets was finished, Zhang Xiaohua had already eaten 6 bowls of white rice and 2 pots of tea. When Zhang Xiaohua picked up the chopsticks, she picked up the red chili on the plate and couldn't find a piece of chicken giblets. Only then did she put down her chopsticks with relief. Although Zhang Xiaohua wanted to eat the chili on the plate, she thought about her mouth and gave up the idea. She touched her round belly. She was really full. Since she had finished eating, she naturally had to pay the bill. Zhang Xiaohua raised her hand to call the waiter. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua was eating, the waiter's eyes didn't leave her. After she finished eating, the waiter stared at her even more closely. Zhang Xiaohua's behavior was really suspicious. She had the tendency of eating without paying attention. If she slipped away, the waiter would have to pay for the meal. How could he not pay attention? At this time, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any other strange behavior and called him over to pay the bill, he was more careful. He was afraid that Zhang Xiaohua would find a cockroach in the spicy chicken giblets and make it difficult for him. When Zhang Xiaohua asked him how much money to pay, the waiter was slightly relieved. He smiled and said, "Dear customer, are you done eating? It's 50 copper coins. 50 copper coins. Zhang Xiaohua said strangely, "Why is it so much? I remember the price on the menu is 45 copper coins." The waiter smiled and said, "Dear customer, you didn't see wrong. That chicken giblets is indeed 45 copper coins." "Then why are you asking for 50 copper coins?" Zhang Xiaohua asked again, "Isn't plain rice free?" The waiter said, "But, dear customer, that pot of tea is 5 copper coins." "What?" Zhang Xiaohua almost jumped up and said, "This water is expensive? Why didn't you tell me?" The waiter had a face of grievance and said, "You didn't ask me. Dear customer, this drink has to be charged. This is tacitly agreed by the government. Didn't you know? If you didn't ask me, how would I know that you didn't know?" Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. She had been extremely careful, but she had still been tricked by the restaurant. Fortunately, this tea was charged by the person and not the pot. Otherwise, wouldn't she have been wronged for drinking 5 pots of tea? Thus, Zhang Xiaohua didn't say anything else. She felt around in her chest and took out the money pouch. Then she put her hand inside and felt around for a long time before taking out a small piece of broken silver. She handed it to the waiter. The waiter felt a wave of dizziness. He originally thought that this Zhang Xiaohua was someone who was prepared to eat for free. He had already made some preparations, but he didn't expect that the other party would actually pay the bill. "If you want to pay the bill, then pay the bill. It's only 50 copper coins. You can just give me copper coins, but you gave me a piece of silver. It looks like it's at least 3 to 5 copper coins. Aren't you playing with me?" The waiter resisted his impulse and lowered his head to ask, "Dear customer, it's only 50 copper coins. Don't you have copper coins? Or a smaller piece of broken silver would also be fine." Zhang Xiaohua said in a serious tone, "I don't have copper coins. This piece of silver in the pouch is also the smallest." The waiter completely fainted. What kind of person was this? Looking at the money pouch, there was at least a lot of silver in it. How could such a rich person be so stingy? She only ate a special spicy chicken offal and added 6 bowls of free white rice. That's right, she also refilled the tea 4 times. She even grumbled for the 5 copper coins for a long time. Not to mention the waiter's bitter face as he took the piece of broken silver to the counter to pay the bill. Zhang Xiaohua's actions attracted the attention of a wretched uncle next to her. He originally had a plate of peanuts and a jug of wine. He slowly drank and his bright eyes looked around. Zhang Xiaohua's food and appearance didn't enter his eyes. However, when Zhang Xiaohua took out the money pouch from her chest and took out a piece of broken silver, she even said that this was the smallest piece in the money pouch. His eyes couldn't help but light up. Not long after, the waiter returned with a tray in his hand. There was a string of copper coins on the tray. The waiter put the copper coins on Zhang Xiaohua's table and handed over an even smaller piece of broken silver. He said with a smile, "Dear customer, this is your 4 copper coins and some broken copper coins. Please accept them." Zhang Xiaohua looked at the copper coins in front of her and said with a smile, "Is the amount of copper coins enough? Is the weight of the silver enough?" The waiter's face was full of righteousness as he said, "Sir, you can doubt my character, but you can't doubt the credibility of our food is heaven. We definitely won't do things that are lacking in weight, and we definitely won't dare to embezzle money." Zhang Xiaohua said, if that's the case, then I'll believe you. Oh right, waiter, I want to ask you. Do you know where Pingyang City is? Pingyang City? That waiter scratched his head and said, dear customer, I've only heard of Pingrong City, Yang City and Yu City. I've never heard of Pingyang City. This time Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. Pingyang City was the biggest city he had ever seen. Yet this knowledgeable waiter had never heard of it before. How far away was this place from Pingyang City? How far had he drifted to? Zhang Xiaohua immediately stood up and asked agitatedly, then may I ask, is there a horse carriage company called Galloping? Galloping Horse Carriage Company? The waiter still scratched his head and said with a smile, there is a horse carriage company, but it's called Galloping. If you want to look for it, just turn left at the door and go straight. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she hurriedly tidied up the silver on the table and put the broken silver into the money bag. She took the string of copper coins and was about to put it into her clothes when she seemed to have thought of something. She took one coin from the string and hesitated for a moment. She took another coin and handed it to the waiter, saying, this is your reward. Thank you for your hospitality. When the waiter saw the two large coins in her hand, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know if he should accept it or not. Most of the customers in this Food as Heaven restaurant had some status. Every time they tipped, they would either give 5 or 10 copper coins. Who would have seen these 2 coins before? However, when he thought about it, these 2 coins were the limit of the customer's behavior just now. Therefore, the waiter accepted it with a smile and said happily, thank you for your reward, dear customer. This time he was sincere. However, Zhang Xiaohua was in a hurry to get up. She turned her head and said, waiter, next time if you want to charge for the tea, remember to remind me in advance. Bang! The waiter fainted at the entrance of the restaurant. Zhang Xiaohua left the Food as Heaven and quickly ran to the left. She didn't seem to notice what was happening behind her and didn't see the waiter's injured appearance. Moreover, he didn't know that when he was still talking to the waiter, the wretched uncle in the corner had already paid the bill. When he heard the waiter mention the horse carriage company, he left the restaurant in advance. Zhang Xiaohua walked out of the restaurant and turned to the left. She looked up and saw a big courtyard at the end of the street. She could vaguely see a flag flying in front of it. It must be the horse carriage company that the waiter mentioned. She estimated that there was still some distance to go. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but quicken her steps. In this small town that she was unfamiliar with, Zhang Xiaohua thought that the only way home was by horse carriage company. What a joke. Even the well-informed waiter didn't know where Pingyang City was. It must be very far away. If she were to walk home, how long would it take? The first time in his life that he went on a long journey was by horse carriage. This time he naturally thought of horse carriage. He couldn't deny that the ancients said, read 10,000 books and travel 1,000 miles. Zhang Xiaohua walked for a while and saw that she would reach the entrance of the horse carriage company after crossing a junction. Zhang Xiaohua could also see the words on the flag clearly. It was really fast horse carriage company, mission accomplished. But just as Zhang Xiaohua was crossing the junction, a middle-aged man rushed from the side. Perhaps the road was slippery because of the snow. He bumped into Zhang Xiaohua. Just as their bodies came into contact, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt a hand reaching into her clothes and was about to take her money back. Zhang Xiaohua's senses were very sharp at this moment. She was also very agile. She immediately stopped in her tracks, turned her body and reached out with her left hand to grab that person's hand. She said, "What are you doing?" That middle-aged man saw that he was grabbed by Zhang Xiaohua, but he didn't panic. He deliberately slipped and fell on the ground in front of Zhang Xiaohua. He then shouted, "Aya, you little boy. Why are you so careless? You knocked me down? Aya, I'm injured." After saying that, he lay on the ground and started groaning. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was holding onto that person's wrist. That person was lying in front of her. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know what to do. Just as she was hesitating, she heard more voices. She turned her head and saw 6 or 7 youths who were slightly older than Zhang Xiaohua coming from the junction. They came over with smiles on their faces. As they walked, they said, "Where did this poor boy come from? How dare he offend our brother Fan?" Seeing this scene, how could Zhang Xiaohua, who had already stolen money bags from Pingyang City, not know what was going on? However, things had changed with the passage of time. The current Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the Zhang Xiaohua he used to be. Not to mention that the current Zhang Xiaohua had used his own small sword to successfully assassinate a black-clothed expert. Just based on his proficient fist of the North Star, he wasn't afraid of these youths who were slightly older than him. Hence, he let go of that middle-aged man's wrist and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He smiled at the people coming from afar, full of confidence. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the timid and brainless country boy he used to be. That middle-aged brother Fan saw a group of youths surrounding him and laughed in his heart. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had let go of his wrist, he didn't get up. He just sat cross-legged on the ground. Some of the people around them avoided them as if they had seen a ferocious dog. Those who were braver stood far away and looked at Zhang Xiaohua with pity. Those who were timid had already run away, afraid that these local ruffians would see them. When the group of youths came in front and surrounded Zhang Xiaohua, that wretched middle-aged man opened his mouth and said, "Little brother, you accidentally knocked me down. Look, I'm injured to the point that I can't get up. What do you think we should do?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at the surrounding youths and smiled at Brother Fan. "Big brother, I walked very normally. Even if I was a little fast, you were the one who bumped into me from the side. If we were to talk about injuries, it should be me." Brother Fan said in a sharp voice, "You're right. Look at the situation now. Are you sitting on the ground or am I sitting on the ground?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "There's so much snow on the ground. I'm not in the mood to sit down. Who knew that you would have such a weird habit of sitting in such dirty places?" Brother Fan said with a smile, "Little brother, you're quite eloquent. Unfortunately, the eyes of the surrounding crowd are as sharp as snow. They all saw it. You can't deny it even if you want to." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Sai, if that's the case, you say you're right and I say I'm right. Then let's go to the yamen." Hearing this, Brother Fan sat up and said with a smile, "Little brother, if that's the case, you're definitely not going to follow the rules?" Zhang Xiaohua asked, "So what if I follow the rules? What if I don't follow the rules?" That wretched Brother Fan said in a sharp voice, "Haha, that's right. Little brother, if you follow the rules, then obediently take out the money pouch in your arms. We won't be ruthless. We'll leave you some money and we'll go our separate ways. What if you don't follow the rules? Look at the crowd around you. They're all Samaritans. They represent the hearts of the masses." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Haha, I finally know how to represent the hearts of the masses. These are the kind-hearted masses. If they were kind-hearted, why would they mix with you?" Brother Fan said with a smile, "Because I'm also a member of the kind-hearted masses." Zhang Xiaohua said, "Then why do I feel that your actions don't seem like it?" Brother Fan heard this and said impatiently, "Look, this little brother doesn't seem like he's going to follow the rules." Zhang Xiaohua was even more amused and said, "If you're not going to follow the rules, then why do you have to rush to follow the rules?" Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was teasing him without any sign of compromise, Brother Fan became angry from embarrassment. He waved his hand at the people behind him and said, "Forget it. Teach this kid a lesson. Let him know how powerful I am." When the people behind him heard this, 3 of them immediately walked out. They raised their fists and waved them around, showing off their thick muscles. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua didn't care and just smiled. When the 3 of them saw that they were talking to no one, they looked at each other, raised their fists and ran towards Zhang Xiaohua. The 3 of them had obviously practiced martial arts for a few days, and their movements were quite good at palm techniques. However, as soon as they got close, Zhang Xiaohua took advantage of them and used a move from the fist of the North Star to block the fist of the person in front of her. Then, she changed her move and swept her leg towards the person's non-existent lower body. With a bang, the man fell to the ground. At this time, another person also came in front of her. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dodge and raised her fist to meet the person's fist. There was also a muffled sound as the 2 fists collided. Zhang Xiaohua didn't move. The person cried out in pain and held his fist. He took a few steps back and opened his mouth in pain. The remaining person came closer, but when he saw what happened to the other 2, he was already scared. He retreated and prepared to retreat. How could Zhang Xiaohua let him go? She shot forward and kicked the person's waist. That person also fell to the ground with an ouch. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Her kick wasn't very strong. Seeing that his 3 subordinates had been defeated, Brother Fan was in a dilemma. If he ran away without fighting, it would be difficult for him to convince the others in the future. However, if he continued to fight, the remaining 4 people and himself might not be a match for this person. What should he do? Brother Fan thought for a moment, then took out something from his waist and made a gesture to the other 4 people. The 4 of them did the same. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua saw that each of them had a dagger in their hands. Looking at the daggers that flashed with a cold light, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel a little flustered. She wasn't afraid of fighting barehanded, but against weapons, she really didn't have any experience. However, there was always a first time for everything. Perhaps this was a kind of test for herself. Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously reached out her left hand to touch the small sword in her bosom. However, she immediately let go. The small sword's power was too great. It was not easy for her to control it. It was fine if she didn't use it, but once she used it, there would definitely be blood. If someone died on the street, it would be quite troublesome. It was better not to use it. When Brother Fan saw that Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were a little flustered, he couldn't help but feel proud. He laughed sinisterly and rushed forward, waving his dagger to stab Zhang Xiaohua's waist. As for the other 4, when they saw their leader coming forward, they also swarmed over, waving their daggers. When Zhang Xiaohua saw the shining daggers stabbing at different parts of her body, she couldn't help but panic. She tried to move her body and used the defensive fist technique of the Fist of the North Star, dodging left and right. After dodging a few moves, she was careless and her arm was cut by a dagger. A smear of fresh blood instantly dyed her sleeve. The injured Zhang Xiaohua suddenly calmed down. She knew that blindly defending wouldn't be of much use. The best defense was offense. Zhang Xiaohua slightly adjusted her pace. Seeing a gap between the daggers, she took a big stride forward and raised her leg to kick one of the people's wrist. Ouch! That dagger flew into the air. Chapter 137. Seeing that his attack was effective, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel more confident. His steps also became more relaxed, as if he was taking a stroll. Speaking of Zhang Xiaohua's combat experience, the fight on that rainy night should have been his battle of attrition. Unfortunately, the situation that night was urgent and there were no real fists and kicks. Moreover, against the black-clothed old man, he also defeated him with a single sword strike. It was a baffling victory. Zhang Xiaohua's battle results were great, but his combat experience was very little, almost zero. Therefore, when he saw these little ruffians holding daggers, his heart would grow hairs. Now that he had knocked away a person's dagger, Zhang Xiaohua had turned the situation around and seized the initiative. Following that, he began to appreciate the art of combat. In the fight with the other 4 people, he carefully practiced his Fist of the North Star. Practice was the only standard to test the truth. The more Zhang Xiaohua fought, the happier he became. The more he fought, the more skillful he became. Those people were practically feeding Zhang Xiaohua moves. His experience was like sitting on a Kongming lantern, slowly rising. How could these ruffians have received proper martial arts training? Their attacks were completely based on instinct and there was no pattern at all. They just happened to be the stepping stones for Zhang Xiaohua, who was a beginner in martial arts, to advance. However, they did not know this, only blindly chopping and stabbing. They could not even touch the corner of Zhang Xiaohua's clothes. After a long time, the leader, the wretched Brother Fan, realized that something was wrong. He originally thought that this was a young country bumpkin, and that he would gain a lot by intimidating him. Who knew that the other party would ignore him? His pride was hurt, and he could only give up on the tradition of using virtue to win people over. He turned to force, but then the situation went out of control. His side actually brought out their ultimate weapons. This was not the worst thing, but the most frightening thing was that this youth became more and more relaxed under the attacks of the daggers. This was not a situation that Brother Fan wanted to see. No matter what, Brother Fan was still a leader. His vision was naturally different from his subordinates. When those people were still in full swing attacking Zhang Xiaohua, he had already secretly held back, and his figure was showing signs of retreating. Zhang Xiaohua, who was in control of the entire situation, seemed to have sensed Brother Fan's movements. This was the main culprit. How could she let him escape? Moreover, fighting with these people was just to increase her proficiency points and stretch her muscles. Zhang Xiaohua was already impatient. Seeing that the other party had made a move, she did not delay any longer. Zhang Xiaohua leaped into the air, her body suspended in the air. Her legs spun in the air like a spinning top, and a few light pop-pop-pop sounds could be heard. She kicked the chests of the 4 people who were attacking her. It was a move from the divine resembling 6 joint fists, killing in 4 directions. Zhang Xiaohua also used the right amount of strength in her leg. Those people couldn't catch their breath and fell to the ground, unable to move. Only Brother Fan was left standing there. At this moment he suddenly heard the sound of applause from the side. Someone cheered, "Good move." Zhang Xiaohua turned to look. Weren't they the few men who were chatting at the Food for the Heavens restaurant just now? Zhang Xiaohua frowned. Just as she was about to speak, that wretched Brother Fan beat her to it. With a plop, he knelt on the spot and threw the dagger far away. He kowtowed and said, "Little master, please spare my life. Little master, please spare my life. I have an 80-year-old mother who is sick in bed, and I have children who haven't even reached the age of 3 who are crying piteously for food. If you take my life today, they won't be able to survive. You've taken 3 lives in one go." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was stunned. Yes, if what he said was true, she really didn't know what to do. This person was so despicable. He sent people to rob her and even used a dagger. If she didn't have any martial arts to defend herself, wouldn't she be bullied by him? But if she let them go, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but think of her own family's experience in Lu Town. Wasn't that the case? Her heart was unwilling to accept this. Just as she was in a dilemma, the few men who had applauded and cheered just now came closer. The square-faced man at the front cupped his hands and said, "Little brother, this one is Yuan Chongqing. Greetings." Zhang Xiaohua saw that the other party was being polite. She didn't know who he was, but she did as she was told. That Yuan Chongqing saw Zhang Xiaohua frown and knew what he was thinking. He laughed and said, "Little brother, please don't take offense. This one is a little impetuous. However, I'm not familiar with this person, so please don't worry." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was even more puzzled. If you were acquainted with this wretched Brother Fan, you could have come over to persuade him. He could have just let you go. If you didn't know this person, why did you come over? Thus, Yuan Chongqing explained the reason in full detail. It turned out that when Zhang Xiaohua was inquiring about the situation with the shop assistant at Food for the Sky, this Yuan Chongqing had heard everything. Even when Brother Fan stood up and looked at him with ill intentions, this trained escort had seen it all. Perhaps he could ignore other people, but this young man was inquiring about Pingyang City. He reckoned that he was most likely from Pingyang City. Since he was from Pingyang City, then Yuan Chongqing couldn't just sit by and watch. Just as Zhang Xiaohua left the restaurant, the few people who had eaten and drank to their heart's content also paid the bill and left under Yuan Chongqing's suggestion. Then they followed behind Zhang Xiaohua from a distance. Brother Fan purposely bumped into Zhang Xiaohua and the group of ruffians surrounding Zhang Xiaohua. This was all seen by Yuan Chongqing and the rest. A few impatient men wanted to go forward, but Yuan Chongqing saw that Zhang Xiaohua looked relaxed and didn't seem to be afraid at all. He pulled the rest aside to watch the show. It was only when Zhang Xiaohua used the fist of the North Star and knocked down the ruffians that the crowd couldn't help but applaud and praise. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua understood that there were still some kind-hearted people in the pugilistic world. However, she was even more puzzled. Why couldn't they help her when she was from Pingyang City? Thus, Zhang Xiaohua asked Brother Yuan, "It should be natural for people in the pugilistic world to help when they see injustice on the road. When you saw me being bullied by the ruffians in your town, you should have helped me without hesitation. Why did you say that you didn't have to help me?" Yuan Chongqing and the rest blushed a little and said awkwardly, "Little brother, you don't know. We are like you and came from afar. A powerful dragon can't defeat a local snake. Isn't it better to avoid trouble if we can?" Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood and asked again, "Then why do you want to help me?" Yuan Chongqing said, "Haha, the reason is very simple. Because we are also from Pingyang City." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she said in surprise, "Really? That's great. I was just worrying about how to go home. With you guys around, we can go together. Haha, at least you can tell me where this is and how I can return to Pingyang City." Yuan Chongqing smiled and said, of course. When fellow townsmen meet, their eyes are brimming with tears. How can we not help you? Oh right, I haven't asked you. Why did your best move look so familiar to me? But I just can't remember where I saw it before. Can you tell me? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and said embarrassedly, the last move you mentioned should be one of the Liuhe fists. But I can't remember the name. I haven't completely mastered it, and it's different from the standard Liuhe fists. You might be able to remember it if you think again. Yuan Chongqing was enlightened and said sympathetically, little brother is right. Now that you mention it, I can really distinguish it. It seems to be called killing in all directions. However, this Liuhe fist is indeed difficult to learn. I have practiced it for a long time, but I still haven't mastered it. It seems that only our head Zhang is the best at this. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind and said with a smile, but you are still better than me. I will forget whatever I practice. You should be happy. Yuan Chongqing said in surprise, but little brother showed off his prowess just now. I can see that your martial arts are also very exquisite. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, that was all pieced together by me. My martial arts are mediocre. If I were to practice with these people, I would have been defeated long ago. After saying that, she glared fiercely at Brother Fan and the others who were kneeling on the ground. Brother Fan saw that this group of people knew each other, and that he couldn't afford to offend them. He could only obediently kneel and smile. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any ideas and asked Yuan Chongqing. Yuan Chongqing thought for a while and said with a smile, little brother, you don't have to care about what he said. It's just a lie. At his age, how can he have an 80-year-old mother? He might have sons from 3 dynasties, but most of them are fake. You don't have to worry about anything. And these people are just local ruffians who only extort idle people. I don't think they would dare to do great evil. When Brother Fan heard that, he echoed, that's right. Little master, please spare our lives. We are just making some spare money. What evil can we do? Zhang Xiaohua said angrily. Then how can you pick up a dagger? Isn't that harming people's lives? Do you dare say that you haven't harmed people's lives? When Brother Fan heard that, he defended himself even more. Little master, I know how to distinguish. Aren't I furious? I didn't expect to lose face in front of a little killing god like you. That's why I made a move. Look at our methods. What kind of outrageous things can we do? Our hands are clean. No lives have been taken. Zhang Xiaohua didn't quite believe him. She turned to look at Yuan Chongqing. Yuan Chongqing nodded, indicating that his words were trustworthy. He whispered in her ear, even if there is something outrageous, we are still foreigners. We don't understand the local situation. And with his situation, even if we send him to the authorities, it's just a formality. It's meaningless. Why don't we just teach him a lesson and let him go? When Zhang Xiaohua heard that, she knew what to do. She kicked Brother Fan and said, I'll believe you for now. In the future, don't do such things that harm people. If I see you again, it won't be so easy. When Brother Fan heard that, he was overjoyed. He said, I know. Thank you for sparing our lives. I'll take them back and plan for their future. I won't do such things again. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he curled his lips and thought to himself, you make it sound better than singing. Who would believe you? At this time, the others also woke up. They supported each other. When they heard Zhang Xiaohua let go, they supported each other and prepared to leave with Brother Fan. But before they could take a step, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly rolled her eyes and shouted, you guys wait. I still have something to do. When Brother Fan heard that, his face turned pale. He turned his head and smiled. Young master, what is it? Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, letting you guys go so easily would be letting you guys off too easily. I can't give you guys a deep lesson. With a heart of compassion, I've decided to teach you guys a lesson. Brother Fan's face became even uglier. He said, listen to this young master's instructions. I wonder how you'll teach us? Zhang Xiaohua said, since you want to rob me and take my money pouch, I naturally have to pay you back in your own coin. Besides, Sai, your actions have deeply hurt my heart. You have destroyed my beautiful impression of this town. This loss is huge. You have to compensate me for my mental damage. I've decided. Zhang Xiaohua said, since you want to rob me and take my money pouch, I'll pay you back in your own coin. Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath and said, I've decided to take your money pouches and let you guys have a taste of being robbed. When everyone heard that, they fainted. If you want to compensate, just say it. Why do you have so many reasons? Brother Fan naturally didn't dare to say anything. He hurriedly urged his subordinates to take out their small pouches and hand them to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind and took them one by one and put them in her bosom. Finally, Brother Fan carefully handed over his slightly full pouch. Zhang Xiaohua weighed it up and down and said, It's not that heavy. Seems your business isn't good. Brother Fan smiled and said, This young master is joking. It's a small business to begin with. It can only be fun but not rich. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, You really don't have anything in your bosom? Brother Fan smiled and said, I really don't have anything. Finished speaking, he rubbed his bosom to show that he wasn't lying. However, his hand suddenly stopped moving. He awkwardly took out a palm-sized light green jade pendant and handed it to Zhang Xiaohua. He said, This I forgot. I still have this thing in my bosom. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, Where did this come from? How could you forget? Brother Fan said embarrassedly, I took this from a rich merchant yesterday. I've already taken it to the town's jade merchant for appraisal. They said it's a worthless fake. I just put it in my bosom. If this young master doesn't mind that it's a fake, please kindly accept it. Zhang Xiaohua didn't stand on ceremony and reached out to take it. She said, I'll take it even if it's a fake. It's just a lesson to you. Thus, under Zhang Xiaohua's awe-inspiring righteousness, she plundered the 6 or 7 people's money pouches before letting them go. Yuan Chongqing and the others were dumbfounded by Zhang Xiaohua's actions. They didn't know what to say. Zhang Xiaohua's words were good, and he had his reasons too. You robbed me, so I had to teach you a lesson. Since you want to save people, then I'm not afraid of using strong medicine. Then you ruffians, I'm sorry. Hand over your money bags. You can treat your own injuries. I'll teach you a lesson, and I hope you can remember this lesson. I hope you can remember this lesson. Zhang Xiaohua put the money pouches and the fake jade pendant into her bosom. Her heart was full, and her eyes curved into crescents. She smiled and said, Everyone, why are you standing there in a daze? Where do you live? Do you want to go to the galloping carriage company together? Yuan Chongqing and the others came to their senses and said, No need, no need. We have our own accommodation. Little brother, come with us. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Then I won't stand on ceremony. After saying that, she followed Yuan Chongqing and the others and walked away, stepping on the snow. Everyone walked by the roadside, not saying a word, as if they hadn't recovered from the shock just now. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind and asked as she walked, Big brother Yuan, after talking for so long, I still haven't asked which part of Pingyang City you are from. Yuan Chongqing said, We are the armed escorts of the Lotus Flower Escort Company in Pingyang City. This year we went on a long trip and came to this remote town. I reckon we'll be going back in a few days. Lotus Flower Escort Company? Armed escorts? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she jumped 3 feet high in surprise, almost scaring everyone. After that, Zhang Xiaohua pulled Yuan Chongqing's hand and asked, Then, Big brother Yuan, do you know someone called Zhang Xiaohu? Zhang Xiaohu. Yuan Chongqing and the others were surprised and said in unison, Of course we know him. He's our leader Zhang. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. No wonder they said that their leader Zhang was familiar with the 6 complementary fists. Wasn't that Zhang Xiaohu's signature fist technique? Yuan Chongqing asked, Little brother, do you know our leader Zhang? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I don't just know him. I've known him for 13 years. Yuan Chongqing was stunned and said, What do you mean? Zhang Xiaohua said, I'm his biological younger brother. I'm 13 years old this year. Do you think I'm right? Yuan Chongqing suddenly understood. Oh, I know. I heard that leader Zhang has a very strong younger brother. What's his name again? Zhang Xiaohua said, He's called Zhang Xiaohua. You have to remember such a handsome and mighty name. Yuan Chongqing smiled and said, Yes, he's called Zhang Xiaohua. He came to the escort agency with leader Zhang last year to apply for a job. I heard that he even lifted 500 kilograms of stone weights. It's a pity that I wasn't there yet. Otherwise, I would definitely recognize you. Little brother, please don't blame me. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, No, Look, I look quite similar to second brother. Yuan Chongqing took a closer look and said, yes, there are some similarities. However, you're still small and skinny now. Your face is a little chubby, but your brows are still similar. However, if you look at it directly, you might not be able to recognize him. Since he was Zhang Xiaohu's subordinate, he was naturally not an outsider. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua had been recuperating at the escort agency for a long time before the new year, so he had long regarded the agency as his home. Therefore, he was very close to Yuan Chongqing and the others. The few doubts he had were thrown away. Sure enough, it didn't take long for them to arrive at a slightly remote alley on the east side of the town. After entering the alley, they saw a half-closed courtyard door. Yuan Chongqing and the others pushed the door open and shouted, Leader Zhang, is Leader Zhang here? Before they could hear Zhang Xiaohu's reply, another loud voice rang out, why are you shouting so loudly? If you don't follow the rules, what's the point of your daily training? Your leader Zhang isn't here. He's out on some errands. If you have anything to say, just tell me. Zhang Xiaohua followed Yuan Chongqing and the others into the small courtyard. The owner of the loud voice also came out from the central room. He was a bald, brawny man with a fierce face. When Yuan Chongqing and the others saw him, they quickly saluted and said, Escort Leader Luo, you're here. Escort Leader Luo approached them. His nose twitched a few times and he frowned and said, you guys went drinking again? Yuan Chongqing smiled and said, Big escort leader, we've been in this godforsaken place for so long with nothing to do. Our brothers were bored, so we went out for a drink. Escort leader Luo said, you can drink but don't cause trouble for me. Otherwise I'll teach you a lesson. Then his gaze fell on Zhang Xiaohua and he said impatiently, who is this person? Why did you bring a stranger here? Please add it to your collection, thank you.